Good afternoon. Today is still Tuesday, December 17, 2019. The regular meeting, and I might add the longest meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners for the year. Started at 9, we'll probably go till 8 or 9 tonight. So this afternoon we have several important items. The first of which is item 12A. This is the second reading and public hearing on ordinance PA 1360 in the matter of amending the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan, RCP, to designate land from Forest F land to non-resource NRES land and rezone that land from impacted Forest F2 RCP land zone to rural residential RR5 NRES RCP land zone for a 131.55 acre property along with a site review, SR suffix, and adopting savings and severability clauses and amending ordinance number PA 1360, original file number 509 PA 15-05722, and remand number 509 PA 19-05724. The applicant is Gimple Hill Properties, LLC, and Deanna Wright is Associate Planner with Lane County Government. She is here, and at this time I will explain some of the procedural rules for a remand on the record Board of County Commissioners public hearing. The purpose of the hearing is to consider arguments limited to the issues identified by the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, remand order in Kattouche et al. V. Lane County, OR LUBA number 2018-109. This decision is subject to criteria cited in the agenda cover memo and attachments. Oral or written argument must be directed toward the appeal. Criteria must be based on the evidence already in the record. The board is conducting this remand hearing to review and address issues raised in the LUBA order as part of the type 4 decision-making process. The board may only consider issues identified in the LUBA order as the basis for the remand decision. At this time, I will call for disclosure of board members' ex parte contacts and for abstentions due to conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts or biases, and a call for any challenges to the hearing authorities' qualifications to hear the matter. So, commissioners, do any of you want to state any ex parte contacts or abstentions for conflicts of interest or bias or otherwise? Okay, seeing none, I just want to mention that I wrote the Oregon Government Ethics Commission some time ago, maybe over a year ago, regarding my law business that I have and that I've done work with Sean Malone. Is he here today? Yeah, and Mr. Malone has a law practice. We've done some work together. It's been several months since we've done any work together, but I wanted to write the Oregon Ethics in Government Commission to ask them if what I should do, and they said I did not have to issue any bias or any withdraw from any matter that we had not discussed. We have not discussed this matter. And Mr. Clark here in our Lane County Office of General Counsel said I don't have to make these comments, but in the interest of fairness, I thought I'd just mention it. I haven't discussed this case with Mr. Malone, or for that matter, anything with Mr. Malone in several months. But we did have that business relationship on matters not related to Oregon land use or anything in Lane County. So I see no ex parte contacts that need to be disclosed. How, Mr. Clark, do I ascertain that if there are any challenges to the hearing authority's qualifications to hear this matter? Just say, is there anyone that,
Yes, I would just ask.
is there anyone who wants to challenge the hearing authority's qualifications to hear this matter? Seeing none, we will move on to more of the rules. Number 4, no person may be disorderly, abusive, or disruptive during the hearing proceedings. Personal conduct is also covered in Lane Code 14070 sub 2. And at this time, we'll hear the staff report that we estimate is 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair and Board of Commissioners. Today, the Board is being asked to review the applicant's remand request and hear argument on the Gimple Hill remand application. The Board first held a hearing on this application in June of 2018 and deliberated in August 2018 with a vote of 4-0 to approve the application under Ordinance 1360. The decision was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, who subsequently issued a remanded decision in May of 2019. A remand application was submitted by the applicant, and notice of an on-the-record hearing was mailed to parties on November 13, 2019. Staff understands the scope of the remand hearing is limited to 2 remanded items. Regarding Goal 4 compliance. Goal 4 is Oregon's statewide planning goal dealing with Oregon's forest lands. LUBA stated the county's findings do not address whether the property must remain in forest zoning in order to protect soil, air, water, and fish and wildlife resources. The applicant's supplemental findings appear to only partially address the listed resources of soil, air, water, and fish and wildlife resources. Regarding Goal 5 compliance with 2 sub-issues. Goal 5 is Oregon's statewide planning goal dealing with protecting Oregon's natural resources. In particular, with this remand, the protection of big game range resource. For background, in a plan amendment, when a new use is being proposed into an area, a jurisdiction is required to determine if the new use will conflict with the Goal 5 resource. And if a conflict would occur, conduct an ESEE analysis, which stands for Economic, Social, Environmental, and Energy. In the original proceedings, Lane County determined since a density standard of 1 dwelling per 40 acres was being met, a conflict did not occur. Therefore, an ESEE was not conducted at that time. LUBA agreed with objectors and concluded that an ESEE needed to be done. The applicant submitted an ESEE as part of the remand request application. However, per staff's review of the applicant's ESEE, staff believes a full analysis appears not provided. As an important side, the LUBA remand additionally ruled that the big game density interpretation must be determined at the local level. Part of Lane County's program to achieve Goal 5 consistency with big game is meeting a dwelling density per acreage standard. Lane County's Goal 5 big game program divides the county into 3 regions: major, peripheral, and impacted big game. The entire subject property is within the peripheral big game category. The county reasoned that a dwelling density standard of 1 dwelling per 40 acres in the peripheral range as recommended from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, as indicated in the county's flora and fauna working papers. Objectors asserted that the county's density standard was improperly applied and argues that the density standard should be applied to a larger area and not just the subject property. As described in the LUBA opinion, this is a local standard on which LUBA provided the county deference. Therefore, staff looks to the board for direction on this matter during your deliberations. Staff believes it is reasonable to conclude that a 1 dwelling per 40-acre recommendation may be limited to the subject property. Regarding Goal 5 compliance with groundwater, petitioners argued that the original findings only considered the first part of the groundwater standards and failed to adequately address how the additional withdrawal of water will not negatively impact surrounding water users. The applicant provided supplemental findings addressing this remand item in which staff finds merit. In conclusion, staff In conclusion, based upon review, the applicant's supplemental findings, it appears further argument, analysis, and findings need to be submitted by the applicant for both the Goal 5 and 4 issues. So the applicant provides sufficient argument and materials at a later date. Staff will need time to review the materials. Or if the board finds that the Goal 4 and Goal 5 analysis is sufficient, the board may choose to approve the request after your deliberations. This morning, staff forwarded comments received for this remand item to the board per email. I believe our counsel, Andy Clark, has some comments to add regarding the letters for you this afternoon. Lastly, in the original staff report, staff believed that the remand application was subject to the 120-day remand rule. Staff now believes that the 120-day remand timeline does not apply per Lane Code Chapter 14, 100, subsection 1DIV, whereas the timelines concerning a plan amendment is not applicable. Staff's available to answer questions should they arise. This concludes my staff report at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Clark, do you want to make any remarks at this time?
Yes, if I might, Chair and Commissioners. As you know, this is an on-the-record hearing on remand, so we've already done the evidentiary piece for this application before it was appealed to LUBA. The idea, and this was noticed for an on-the-record hearing, that is no new evidence is to come in today unless this board decides it needs more evidence, in which case you can set another hearing, I think. What's envisioned is really a legal argument about why or why not the evidence in the record already and the draft findings that have been submitted either do or do not substantiate the application. In that regard, Ms. Wright has sent to the commissioners an email this morning with a number of late submittals. I don't mean too late, but just, at the 11th hour. One of which comes from Mr. Malone, other from Dr. Turner, and another one as well. I think it's okay to receive those into the record for the sole purpose or to the extent that they contain legal argument and analysis, and don't attempt to introduce more facts into the record. If there are facts, if the statement is essentially fact-based, then I think it's up to the board to sort of ignore the factual elements of those documents. In particular, I note that the letter from Ms. Turner, Dr. Turner, is essentially, it may be reiteration of facts that are already in the record, but most of that 2 pages is essentially factual statements and not a lot of argument. And so there's not a lot there, I think, that the board can base its decision on remand on. But like I say, I think it's okay to receive those documents and the rest of these documents for the purposes of argument, but not for new evidence. And similarly, in that connection, Ms. Wright informs me that Mr. Malone has dropped off this packet that hasn't gone to you yet, which isn't argument. Mr. Malone's letter that's in the material you already have, I think it's essentially argument analysis, and I don't find any problem with that at all. This latest bit seems to be solely evidence. I'm assuming this is already in the record, that it had been before you and went up to LUBA and is part of the record on this remand as well. To the extent it's just duplication, I think it's okay for you to refer to it today. I would not advise adding this to the record, both because it's not time for evidentiary material, and second, it may just be duplicative of what's there already. But if you want to refer to it today, I don't have any problem with that. You may want to hear from Mr. Malone and Mr. Gilardi on that issue, however. So with that, if there's any more questions, happy to answer it, but that's all I have.
Okay. So let's move on to opening the public hearing and get ready to take some testimony. Again, the testimony we're taking is not on new facts, but only on argument within that is already in the record. Are both sides represented by lawyers?
Mr. Malone represents a number of the neighbors in this area, and of course, Mr. Gilardi represents the applicant.
Okay. Why don't we give the applicant's lawyers 10 minutes. We'll give the opponents opponent's lawyer 10 minutes, and we'll give all other people 3 minutes. So first up will be the applicant's argument, and we can either have the applicant itself or the lawyer for the applicant, and just identify who that is, and we'll take that person first. Very good. Here he comes. And our vice chair will set the timer at either 10 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on who you, let us know who you are.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Michael Gilardi. I'm applicant Gimple Hill Properties Legal Counsel. For the record, my address is P.O. Box 8529 in Coburg, 97408. This is a very narrow, simple remand from LUBA that unfortunately has become pretty complicated and time-consuming because of the way that this remand process has played out. What I'd like to do is give just a little more context for how we got here today to supplement what you heard from Ms. Wright, and then I'd like to spend the bulk of my time responding to the staff report. I'll say a few words about procedural issues that Mr. Clark discussed, and then I'd like to listen to the opponent's testimony, and I asked for the opportunity to have some rebuttal to that, especially given that they've introduced some evidence that I have not had the opportunity to see, or they hope to introduce that evidence. So as you heard in the staff report, this application dates to 2015. Formally, the application is to change the zoning of about 131 acres from forest F2 to rural residential. That rezoning has always been intended for a specific development. Originally, the development was for it was for 14 rural residential lots of about 5 acres each. The applicant, Gimple Hill, developed a series of detailed professional studies to support that zone change, studies about soils, studies about agronomics, studies about timber productivity, about wetlands and other waters on the property, about other natural resource impacts, including big game. There's about 10 years of groundwater studies in the record. Overall, there's about 3,700 pages in the record that were delivered by the county to LUBA. And Gimple Hill felt confident that evidence supported the rezoning to facilitate those 14 additional residential lots. There were a number of people who disagreed, neighbors, as long with local and statewide activist groups. That was debated extensively at the Planning Commission. Ultimately, the Planning Commission voted 5-3 to recommend denial of that proposal. And so Gimple Hill decided to take a step back and substantially scaled back that proposed development. The development that went before the board in 2018 was for 2 new residential lots of 40 acres each. That's bigger than much of the EFU zoning in the county. A lot of the EFU zoning is 30 acres. So, two residential lots of 40 acres each, and then adjustment of the existing residential lot on the property to be about 7 acres. And the remainder of the 131 acres would be dedicated to open space and to a vineyard that exists on that property. We brought, after that proposal was made and findings were proposed to support that decision, Gimple Hill asked me to come on board and to help shepherd that new proposal through the board and to hopefully reach an agreement with the opponents to support the development. So we brought that proposal to the board. What I heard in that hearing from several of the opponents was that if the applicant was really serious about limiting the development to that, then they would support it. We went to work to show we were serious. We developed several covenants that would bind the property forever to that development. But the opponents would not accept that. And it became clear to us at that point that they were not willing to negotiate with us in good faith and would do whatever they could to oppose this development. The board then voted 4-0 to support the rezoning with specific restrictions to limit the property to the specific development that we had proposed and the covenants that we had offered. The opponents took that to LUBA, used various procedural machinations to delay the case for a number of months. Finally, LUBA issued the decision in May. The decision does not question the decision that the board made. It doesn't question the evidence in the record to support that decision. What it asks the board to do is to go through certain formalities in the findings in the decision to meet Goal 5 rule and to address this other forested land standard in Goal 4. So I then, within several days of after that decision came down, reached out to County Council and the staff to talk about what the remed would look like and how we would handle it. They granted me a meeting in June. I proposed that the board just simply revise the findings and issue a new decision and explain why I believed that that was appropriate, both under state law and under the county's procedures. They asked me to, prepare the proposed findings and a narrative to support that. That's in your packet that you eventually received. But I didn't get any feedback on that, and time went by, and then eventually this hearing was scheduled. So I'm not sure if the board really had an opportunity to view the proposal that I made at the time before the wheels were set in motion for this hearing. And then the staff report came out last month, and without an opportunity to really have a dialogue about that raises a few issues. And so I'd like to go through those. The main issue, the first issue is really about this, about Goal 5 and about what's called the ESEE analysis. And I think there's some confusion about what that is. I think there's some implication in the staff report, and certainly the opponents have made this argument that it's a scientific analysis of natural resources and how to protect them. And that's not what an EC is. An EC is a policy analysis that the county has to adopt to decide whether it wants to protect certain resources, whether it wants to limit uses to protect certain resources, and how it will go about doing that. What the board's decision did in 2018 was to adopt a Goal 5 program to protect the big game resource, to limit the residential development to one dwelling per 40 acres. And the rationale for that was that because the county has this 40-acre standard, there's no conflict with the Goal 5 resource, so there's no need to go through the formalities of the EC analysis. What LUBA said is, no, you've sort of skipped to the last step of the analysis, but you still have to document the other 3 steps. But what the staff report is saying, and this is you have to have a comprehensive comparison of every single possible use that could occur in either the existing forest zone or in the rural residential zone, and how those could potentially impact wildlife. That is not required by LUBA's decision. It's not required by the Goal 5 rule. It's totally infeasible, and it's totally meaningless given that the board has decided to limit the use of this property to this specific use. And I think that would also be bad policy in this county. The county has this big game range that covers the entire county. The entire county is in one of 3 categories. And as a result of a recent LUBA decision in the Hazeldale mine case, all 3 of those categories, even the impacted range, is considered a significant Goal 5 resource. So if you had to go through this comprehensive comparison, it would be nearly impossible to ever change the zoning of any property in the county, because you would have to go through every single one of these uses and talk theoretically about how they could impact big game. There's about 60 uses allowed in the F2 zone, and there's about 40 uses allowed in the rural residential zone. So you're going to go through 100 different uses and talk about whether they could impact big game. So one specific example of that that's in both our proposed findings and the staff report is a golf course. So does a golf course impact wildlife? Well, what kind of golf course is it? You know, how much land is taken up? Is there a driving range? Is it 9 holes? Is it 18 holes? Is it, you know, minimally landscaped, using, you know, organic methods, or is it very chemically intensive? Are there fences? How big are they? So there's all these very detailed factual questions that apply to every single one of these uses. So it's not feasible to conduct the kind of analysis that staff has asked for. I only have 30 seconds left on my clock. I'd like to ask for additional time.
How much more time would you like?
I'd like an additional 5 minutes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
And are you going to reserve any time for later? What do you want? Oh, like 10 minutes, not reserve 5?
I'd like, yes,
Okay,
please.
5 more minutes now.
Thank you.
And we'll give the other side the same amount of time.
So what the Gimple Hills proposed findings do is they talk about the, you know, the range of uses that could occur on this property, either if it stayed in F2 zone or if it went to rural residential. And that some of these uses could impact wildlife, either under the existing zoning or under the rural residential zoning. And then it explains how the decision that the board already made avoids the impacts that are there. That's what LUBA asked for. And the reason they asked for it is just to set an example for future decisions around the state. Again, LUBA did not question the decision that the board made, didn't question the evidence that's in the record for that. Another issue in the staff report is on page 7. There's a suggestion that there's no analysis in the findings that we proposed of, you know, the consequences of allowing or not allowing a use. And as I mentioned, that's not accurate. We do address the, you know, the universe of issues and describe how the decision that the board made avoids those conflicts. On page 7 of the staff report, there is a statement that the Goal 5 program, the decision that the county already made, needs to be clarified to show, you know, how it complies with Goal 5. And that's also not accurate. On page 6 of our proposed findings, what it says is it details how what's going to be allowed under the decision that the board made in 2018 to limit this to 2 new residential lots plus the existing lot plus the, you know, the covenants to keep the rest of the property in open space and agricultural use. Moving on to the groundwater issue, the staff report makes a statement that we're not sure we can reach a decision about the credibility of the competing evidence. And I think that's inappropriate because the board did make a decision on that in 2018. There is a specific finding in the 2018 decision that says, based on the evidence of applicant's expert, which is EGR, that there will be no impact on neighboring wells. And what LUBA did here, which really surprised me because I thought it was very persnickety, is they said, well, yeah, you made that finding in this part of the decision, which has to do with the county's rural residential comprehensive plan standards, but there's another set of standards that apply under Goal 5 and the 1982 water working paper. And you didn't specifically say the same thing there. And so what our proposed findings do is they reiterate the finding that the board already made, and they supplement that finding by describing the other evidence that's in the record about the competing groundwater information. A couple more things here. So there's a statement on page 9 of the staff report that we don't say which forest uses are harmful and which uses are precluded. Again, the findings very specifically describe what's going to be allowed under this decision. There's another statement on page 9 that it's not clear whether the wetlands findings encompass all waters. There's actually an explicit statement in the findings on page 10 that says that the wetland study that was done encompassed all the waters on the property. It's not just wetlands, it's any kind of wet area on the property. And finally, there's a statement that we haven't detailed all of the other resources under Goal 4 that and whether the property needs to stay in forest zone in order to protect those resources. That's also inaccurate. On page 10 of our amended findings, there is a specific paragraph for each one of the 4 resources that are outlined in Goal 4, air, water, et cetera. So in conclusion, well, first of all, I think we need to clarify the procedure of what's going to happen next, and happy to talk more about this on rebuttal. As Mr. Clark said, this is it was noticed as an on-the-record hearing. That means no new evidence, but yet the staff report is saying that they want to see more analysis from the applicant. Well, we can't give more analysis on an on-the-record hearing. All we can do is write findings. And so I'm certainly happy to work with the county on revising the findings that we've proposed to support the decisions, but, we're not, we haven't asked for new evidence, and we still are not asking for new evidence. So finally, the board made this decision after an extensive process. LUBA's decision does not call the board's decision into question. It does not question whether the evidence is in the record. So I urge you to focus on the findings issue and limit this proceeding to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there persons in favor who agree with the applicant that wish to testify? Okay. Then we'll move to, before we move to argument of persons opposed to the proposal, I'd like to call on arguments of other persons, those that are not in favor and those that are not opposed, called other persons in the land use law. We don't usually have those people. Okay, very good. Now we'll move on to item D, which is the argument of persons opposed to the proposal, and we'll give, did I say 15 minutes? Mm-hmm. Okay, so assuming that 10 of those, 20 minutes of which 5 is being reserved, we'll give 20 minutes to the opponent's lawyer, Mr. Malone. And there's no more rebuttal for the opposed.
Just to be clear, other individuals opposed to the application?
Yeah, they'll get 3 minutes each.
Great. Well, first thing I need to address is the sort of procedural issues that we talked about at the beginning here. First thing is that no new evidence has been submitted. The only thing that has been submitted, and my intention was that these packets here would be passed out to the board. I'd be happy to do that. This contains all evidence that's already in the record for the Luba case, and at the back is an additional testimony of mine, which so 4 packets here, plus an additional testimony from me. So again, no new evidence, since this is an on-the-record hearing. This is all the record from the Luba case, and at the end there's additional argument from me. Just to walk through these packets real quick before we get going. The first one is going to be what the opponents put together, what the neighbors, I call them, my clients, put together in terms of the big game and wildlife observations on and around the subject property. Feel free to leaf through that. It's really a testament to Lane County and the wildlife resources we have here. 2 of the remand issues are central to wildlife and big game issues, so I thought it was very important to get that in front of you. The next letter, or the next document, is a letter from ODF&W, essentially the only qualified expert to have provided any testimony with regard to these big game wildlife issues. And what ODF&W said is stick to your 40-acre per single residence standard. That's what they said. And essentially comes out against what the applicant is doing here. I would encourage you to read that if you have not. The third document here is sort of anecdotal evidence in relation to the first one. about the observations of big game and wildlife on and around the property. Again, demonstrating that there is an abundance of this wildlife, that this wildlife is using the subject property as a resource, which categorizes it as forest lands under one of the remand issues. And the next document is well data for the Gimple Hill Road neighborhood. And so a very important issue on remand is these individuals, the neighbors' water resources, which are going to be dramatically affected by the introduction of dramatically increased residential density. And there's a point on that I'd like to make, and then there's a final bit of testimony from me as the last document. I'll just start with the well data issue. This board can use its discretion to determine which evidence to depend on and rely upon in its findings. It can rely on the neighbor's testimony and evidence, and not only did they submit this evidence of deepened wells, additional wells having to have been drilled, but they also submitted a hydrologist report from a certified geologist, also backing up these claims and disputing what was set forth by the applicant and their geologist. And the board, in its discretion, has the ability to choose and pick between evidence. And if the board would so choose to rely on the neighbor's evidence and deny the application, I am prepared to write findings in support of a denial that would be upheld on appeal. I can do that very easily. With regard to the big game and wildlife resources issues, essentially the applicant just completely failed to prepare what's called an ESEE or an EC analysis. That essentially, it's an in-depth document. I think what Mr. Gilardi was saying was very inaccurate, that this is some sort of policy document or that it doesn't need any sort of scientific backing. I can dispose of that very easily by a case referred to as the Martinez case, a Landwash Lane County v. Lane County case, in which an individual prepared an EC analysis for a plan amendment zone change, and some random individual prepared this EC analysis. That is, it wasn't someone with expertise. They had no expertise in wildlife or expertise in sort of big game. And LUBA saw that and they said, how can you possibly base sort of these scientific, these wildlife, biological conclusions when you have absolutely no expertise in this field? And LUBA remanded that to the county. It hasn't been dealt with yet, but that goes against exactly what Mr. Gilardi is saying, that this is just some sort of broad-based policy document. This is an intensive, not only environmental analysis, but an economic analysis, a social analysis, and an energy analysis that results from dramatically increasing residential density on the subject property, because ODF&W said you should only have one residence per 40 acres. And what's going on here is there's unfortunately a bit of a sleight of hand occurring here, and LUBA saw through it, and I hope that the board this time around sees through it as well. Mr. Gilardi indicated that before the Planning Commission initially, they sought something around about 14 residences on the subject property. And then he said, after the Planning Commission recommended denial, because of the potential impacts to neighboring wells, essentially, that they would scale that back. Well, that's just simply not the case. That's the sleight of hand. What they brought forward at the Board of Commissioners was to say, we're going to have two 40-acre parcels zoned RR5. And what that means is that those two 40-acre parcels can each be subdivided subsequently into 8 lots. So instead of having 2 residential parcels, you are now going to have 16 residential parcels. It's very important that this be understood because this is sleight of hand, and LUBA saw through it with regard to this EC analysis. And moreover, the RR5 zone allows even more intensive uses that aren't even being addressed in the EC analysis. So an EC analysis is essentially required when you're introducing new uses into, when you rezone property. And there are a host of just dramatic amount of increased development can occur in the RR5 zone rather than the F2 zone. And beyond that, there is an existing, if you look at this, just simply the second page here of the big game and wildlife observations, you'll see the subject property. And you'll see these properties inside it. That's a Measure 49 subdivision that was already put on this property. So the property owners here, or their predecessors, already reaped the benefits of developing rural resource land. And what is proposed here is just adding on to that. They want some, they want more, and you give them an inch, take a foot, et cetera. So this subject property is now being proposed to potentially have anywhere from 16 to 32 additional lots and residences. Our R5 zone allows for duplexes. The RR5 zone allows for just a significant amount of intensive uses that simply are not being addressed in the EC analysis whatsoever. This is probably the 6th, 7th case I've done on EC analyses. And I look at this EC analysis that was put forward here, and it does not appear to be a serious attempt at performing something that would be upheld on appeal. I have in my December 9th submission that I think was only submitted today. Again, a lot of these things that were sent to you earlier today over email, they had been coming in for the past week and a half, but for whatever reason, they were withheld until today. And so Mr. Clark said that they came in at the last minute. Simply untrue. They've been coming in for the last week and a half, and for reasons I'm not sure, they've been withheld until today. So if, and I wholeheartedly agree with staff in saying that there just hasn't been enough done on this EC analysis. They haven't addressed all this, the new uses that would be introduced by the RR5 zone, the much greater intensive development, and beyond the factual basis that isn't there because the applicant is attempting to cull from the existing record a bunch of information about wildlife effects that doesn't exist there in their EC analysis. So beyond that factual failure, there are a host of times in which the applicant has misconstrued what the EC analysis is. It really calls into question whether the applicant understands the EC process, the Goal 5 EC analysis process, and it doesn't appear so as far as I can tell. It requires detailed factual findings that have to be backed up by substantial evidence. And because this is an on-the-record hearing, the applicant has not been able to put that new evidence in. The applicant requested this be an on-the-record hearing. So the applicant has, to an extent, injured himself in that manner. And I don't think the board should entertain allowing the applicant to, in light of his first failure in preparing the findings that got remanded from LUBA, and now this second time preparing findings that are clearly deficient in terms of what staff believes, what the neighbors believe. So we should not push this further to the point to allow the applicant to sort of continue these failures. We should just simply deny this application, direct me to work with county council to prepare findings denying the application, and they'll be upheld. There are numerous bases. My December 9th letter to the commission points out probably 20 different bases on which you can deny this application, both factual and legal. And there's this third issue, whether this property is still forest land. Now, state law says that forest land remains forest land if it's to be used for wildlife resources, soil, air, water resources, and so forth. Well, again, I would point you to this document that's from the record and just look at all these wildlife resources that are utilizing this area. You can't really come to a different conclusion once you look at this packet, and then once you address the anecdotal evidence provided by the neighbors. It just sort of boggles the mind that the applicant is proposing something contrary to this. And again, the applicant is not proposing any new evidence. This is the evidence that the neighbors already put into the record. They worked their tails off to do that, and in part that is why LUBA remanded the matter to the county. It's probably obvious from the different people speaking for and against this application, but I would just like to take this opportunity to ask anyone in the audience here that is opposed to the application to please stand up to demonstrate that you're opposed to this application. Appreciate
Your Honor, I'm sorry, if I can interrupt Mr. Malone for a minute. This essentially is factual evidence you're being offered for support of the argument.
I object to that. I have to put a procedural objection on the record. I disagree with that. There's nothing factual about what just happened.
Okay.
We don't allow that. Doesn't address the criteria.
testimony will be taken. Thank you very much for standing up, but this is an on-the-record hearing. And Mr. Clark, I'm not quite sure what you're saying, that having people stand up is the problem, or are you saying that the information that is referred to in the packet is outside of the scope of the hearing?
No, the information in the packet, I'm taking Mr. Malone at his word that the stuff you have is in the record. I have no reason to doubt that at all. So reference to stuff that's in the record is perfectly fine. But yeah, asking people to stand up and register their particular votes,
Well,
I think is.
we'll let people speak for themselves when we open it up to opportunity for people to submit their 3 minutes of comments. So, Ms. Malone, I see our time is 3 minutes and 20 seconds for you, so please conclude your remarks in that time.
Thank you. This other issue of the covenants that the applicant has been proposing to limit development, what we did previously is went to a very esteemed attorney in town, and we said, take a look at these covenants. Are there holes in them? Can they be amended? Will they limit development? And the answer was essentially that no, they won't be able to do that. And so we were attempting to negotiate in good faith with the applicant to determine whether there was a way in which we could ensure that the two 40-acre parcels would not be further subdivided. And the covenants didn't do it. And so we came back and we said, how about a conservation easement? We are sure that that will solve the problem. And the applicant refused to do that. So it almost felt as if we were not being met in good faith in our negotiations. So I'd like to correct the record on that with regard to what Mr. Gilardi said. And again, here's one sort of, other sort of component of this sleight of hand I talked about. If the applicant was truly candid about not wanting to further subdivide, why is the applicant seeking RR5 zoning when he could seek RR10 zoning? That would reduce his ability to subdivide only to 10-acre parcels instead of 5-acre parcels. It makes no sense. I've asked the applicant that. He has no good answer with regard to that. And it just goes to demonstrate that the true intent here is to further subdivide this property, to continue this sleight of hand at the expense of neighboring well uses and water uses, at the expense of wildlife on forested lands, and at the expense of big game range wildlife throughout the county. And I'm more than happy to take any questions from the board if they have any. But the real fact of the matter is I would encourage you all to deny this application. It's kicked around for so long. The Planning Commission proposed to deny it based on pretty much the exact same thing that's occurring here, just again veiled with that sleight of hand sort of technique. And if you deny it, you can direct me to prepare findings in support of that denial, both factual and legal, and that would be upheld on appeal. And with that, I welcome any questions, but if not, I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. This time we'll take 3-minute testimonies from persons who have signed up. After we conclude those that have signed up, we will ask for people that haven't signed up. So in order of signing up for people against, first up is Bill Barnett, Will Alkin, Melody Clarkson, and Max Wilbert. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Bob Katosh, and Janie Thomas, and Andrea Turner. So first up, Bill Barnett. And after I call your name, please come up. So next up is Will Alkin. Come up to the front row so you're ready to roll. And our vice chair will turn the timer on and start it for 3 minutes. As soon as you introduce yourself and tell us where you live, then you'll get 3 minutes.
My name is Bill Barnett, Charles W. Barnett. I live at 86821 McMorritt Lane, Eugene, which is about a half mile from the impact property that we're talking about. And I figured that my 11th hour submission that I sent on December 4th would have been read by you guys already, so I'll just read it. I won't have time to get through it, but I'll read it. As a 34-year resident and property owner in the impact zone of the Gimple Hill Properties LLC proposal, I urge you to deny this rezoning to RR5 because it's based on shaky science and short-term profit. I've lived at 86821 McMorrit since 1985. During that time, as Lane County well drilling records show, I've seen my well's static water level drop from 90 feet to 125 feet. The flow has been cut in half. I have many neighbors. I'm not going to go through all the details, but who have had much worse stories than mine, and there's all that's in the record. So you can, it's been in the record for years now. And I'm going to point out the covenants business too, because they argue that they're going to give us covenants but they're not binding to future owners. So RR5, Mr. Malone just described what that means. I just wanted to repeat that. In the agenda, in the staff analysis cover memo from November 15th of this year, it states, absent a full SE analysis regarding Goal 5, staff is unable to recommend approval because it appears that the LUBA remand requirement has not been met. And that's from the agenda cover letter memo, page 7. And the planning director and professional staff in the county's planning department gave detailed reasons why the applicant's analysis is deficient. I urge you to trust your staff and follow their recommendations as stated in the agenda cover memo. So what's happening here is that rather than develop in a UGB zone where RR5 would be easy, they decided to develop here where it's not RR5, figuring they would get a quick and easy zone changing. You know, that, and it didn't turn out to be quick or easy. We've been fighting this for years. We're a community of neighbors who care about each other and just don't want to see a developer run roughshod over our water rights. Our aquifer is very fragile, and it's been documented as so, and all of us have well problems. Differing amounts, but we all have those problems. And the summers are getting drier, the droughts are continuing, and we don't really see that abating. So that's our concern, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Will Alkin, and if you notice, the yellow light comes on with 1 minute. 1 minute to go of your 3 minutes. Melody Clarkson up after Mr. Alkin. Welcome, Mr. Alkin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Will Alkin. My family and I live west of the vineyards at Gimple Hill, 29127 Gimple Hill Drive. And we oppose any changes to the comprehensive plan and believe the area should remain designated forest land and not rezoned to rural residential. If this rezoning to RR5 were to be allowed, what would prevent others from making the same request? The purpose of any comprehensive plan is to prevent an individual from profiting from a spot zoning change that would only serve the interests of that one private party over the public good. If the commissioners allow this change to the comprehensive plan, how many others would make similar requests? What would happen to our beautiful area, our struggling ecosystems, our wells? With consistent drought conditions in our area, we are concerned for the health of the forest as it is. We need to keep as many trees in the area as possible. The health of the fir trees is diminished when the forest is thinned to any extent. The people who own the property just above us removed many dead fir trees this year, which died because of the drought. Many great horned owls lived just above us, and we are wondering if soon we will no longer hear the owls in the winter evenings. The drought conditions also affect our well. Every year, our well water pressure decreases at the end of the summer, enough to cause us to stop the irrigation of our garden and our orchard, which is a hardship for our farm. Not only are we concerned about the amount of water available from our well, we are concerned with its quality, which would be adversely affected by runoff due to any further paving or septic installation or drilling above us. The burden of proof here is on the developer. This application has failed to prove that our wells and wildlife will not be affected by further development. Please act on the behalf of the public good and deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Melody Clarkson, followed by Max, whose name I can't quite read. So welcome.
I'm Melody Clarkson. I live at 86083 Cherokee Drive. My husband and I are immediately downhill to the southwest of the applicant's property. We purchased our acreage with an existing well, built a home in a forest of oaks and firs, which we happily share with deer, coyotes, mountain lions, bobcat, foxes, and bear. You may ask me for my photos. I cannot tell you how incredibly fortunate we feel that in our dotage, we can experience a connectiveness with these animals. Relevant to protecting habitat for these animals, Lane County has reasoned and accepted the recommendation of ODWF biologists and scientists. Thus, for compliance with Oregon's Goal 5, the county supports one dwelling per 40 acres to protect the game on land designated as peripheral range designated by the county. My husband and I request that Lane County continues to follow the ODFW guidelines and the Board of Commissioners' own comprehensive plan standards for peripheral range property and deny proposals for rezoning. Accepting the applicant's request for rezoning is denying big game the right to life. Our values out there, we hope, are Lane County's stated values to protect resources, groundwater, to support residents who have invested in a lifestyle that requires water from wells. Many families here on Gimple Hill raise food for themselves and for others. I do. When our wells are running low at the end of summer, when people are trucking in water, the produce becomes exceptionally expensive, or many of us simply quit gardening. Those are the human facts. The applicant's ongoing pressure to change the existing protective zoning for his personal gain at the expense of many lacks humanity. My husband and I argue that with the facts presented in this hearing from our attorney and others, and with our mutual understanding that rules and regulations protect a society and its culture, that you, the Lane County Commissioners, have the responsibility to reject the applicant's proposal, which will subvert our county's established rules and regulations. And I am appalled that our letters, which were submitted at an early date, according to a meeting that we had, that were not given to you, that were withheld. That's very disingenuous on the part of staff.
Okay, Max, then Bob Katosh, Janie Thomas, Andrea Turner. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Max Wilbert. I live at 28547 Siesta Lane, which is within a mile of the affected property, and I drive by it almost every day. I'm probably one of the youngest people in the room, and I'm one of the people who's going to have to live with all of the consequences of the decisions that are made by prior generations. I was just spending some time with family and my nephew, who was just born. My sister is about to have another baby, and they're not facing a very good world. You pick up any newspaper today, and you're going to see the reports. The bird populations have collapsed 40% in the last 50 years. The insect apocalypse, many of you probably saw that headline. All these reports, they're endless, and they're impossible to ignore. They're on the front pages of every paper in the world. The thing is, these global catastrophes aren't made up of massive parts. They're made up of small individual pieces. 1 million small decisions made all over the world, right? So every tree that is cut contributes to the deforestation problem that we're experiencing. Every house that is built contributes to this problem that we're experiencing of development destroying wild lands all over the world. We're talking here about peripheral big game habitat, and I think that's a misleading term because it's all going to become peripheral. If we take the peripheral habitat and then we develop it, where are the animals going to go? They're going to be left with only the good habitat. Then that habitat's going to become peripheral. I've only lived in this neighborhood for about 4 years, but during that time I've seen probably between 10 and a dozen houses go up within a mile or two of my house. Now this is in a rural neighborhood, and I've heard stories of people 60, 70 years ago riding a donkey into Eugene on the dirt road that was Gimple Hill back in those early days. Look at it now. Look at what's happening. This is a steady, progressive process, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one house at a time, one new wild forest cut down and paved at a time. So I think the question here is pretty simple. It's, do we want to leave a living world for our future? And I think the answer should be pretty simple as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next. Bob Katosh.
Hi, my name is Bob Katosh. I live at 86835 McMorrit Lane with my wife, Annabelle Street. Both of us have lived in our home for over 30 years, and our home is located 1/2 mile from the Vineyards Gimple Hill development. And one thing I do want to say, I really hope that you read the submissions that were given to you. It really tells the story of what the neighbors' concerns are. It's a really important piece of all this. The Gimple Hill Neighborhood Group was organized in February 2017. So we've been doing this almost for 3 years because of our concerns about the effects of the proposed expansion the Vineyards at Gimple Hill housing development would have on, 1, reduction of groundwater available for our wells, 2, loss of viable farmland for unnecessary housing, 3, loss of wetlands, and 4, less protection for big game in the Gimple Hill area. And given that our neighborhood group has been low budget and certainly not well funded, as stated by the attorney for Gimple Hill LLC, we've had assistance from Landwatch Lane County, 1,000 Friends, the Crag Law Center up in Portland, and our own attorney, Sean Malone. And the Gimple Hill Neighborhood Group has met a number of times since February 2017. It's a very cohesive group with an average of about 25 members attending the meeting, which is pretty much what the folks who got it, I think that was a number of the people who got up. And Gimple Hill area is classified as limited in groundwater quality and quantity. Our wells become stressed during the summer months to the point that at times we've been concerned that our well might go dry. Based on our experience and our neighbors' experience, similar experiences with our wells, it was clear to us that these new wells, if constructed, would begin to deplete the aquifers which we all depend on. And we had a hydrologist from Bend, Mark Winger, review the applicant's data and wrote a report in which he submitted to the Planning Commission, basically saying that groundwater levels in the Gimple Hill area have declined and will most likely continue to decline. Additional development will contribute to the decline of groundwater levels to the detriment of existing well owners. And the Planning Commission made the recommendation, we testified in front of them, to deny the application because of concerns about the depletion of the Goal 5 resources of groundwater in the Gimple Hill area. And we recommend that the board adopt option 2, which is deny the application. And that's what our position is. So thank you.
Okay, Janie Thomas and following her, Andrea Turner.
Yes, good afternoon. My husband.
You could just give us your
Janie
name. Yeah.
Janie
your-
Thomas and my husband, John Levy. We live at 29437 Gimple Hill Road, about a quarter of a mile from the subject property. I submitted this letter on December 6th. And we are in opposition to the application by the Gimple Hill Properties for rezoning. And I also want to address the water issues. We have drilled 4 wells on our 5.5-acre property. The first went dry after less than 1 year. The second pumped 1 gallon per minute and went dry during the summer. The subsequent third and fourth wells must be run at 4 to 6 hour intervals during the summer to ensure adequate water. We have water delivered during August and September to maintain the drip irrigation in our garden. Most of our neighbors, or many of our neighbors in close proximity to the subject property are faced with at least these kinds of problems or even more severe. We're very deeply concerned about the impact of additional water withdrawal in the proposed development, especially given the fact that the applicant has failed to address any survey of existing water conditions in neighboring properties or provide recent data on water quality. The applicant used a 2007 study. LUBA agrees on this point and has concluded that the applicant has failed to address whether additional withdrawal will have a negative effect on the surrounding properties. Also, ODF has recommended and continues to support 1 resident per 40 acres for peripheral big game range in our prior testimony. We, the applicants, have submitted clear evidence with trail cams about the presence of big game, including bear, cougar, bobcat, deer, and elk. While the applicant does propose creating 2 40-acre lots, they also propose rezoning the property to RR5, which leaves open the potential of permitting subdivision of 16 additional lots. The covenant proposed for the development can be modified and in no way guarantees that the 2 40-acre lots will not be subdivided in the future and leaving no recourse for the Gimple Hill residents and neighborhood group. Refusal to consider a conservation easement, which would be permanent and enforceable, gives further evidence to the possibility of further development. We urge that the applicant on remand be denied as recommended in the findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and Andrea Turner. And by show of hands, is there anyone that wants to testify against that has not signed up? Okay, so Ms. Turner, go ahead and state your name and where you live, and our vice chair will set the timer for 3 minutes.
My name is Andrea Turner, and I live at 29141 Gimple Hill Road. My property, as the crow flies, is located 500 feet to the west of the subject property. I am the proud owner and custodian of 95 acres, so we're talking about a similar type of acreage to the subject property. I have lived on that property now for 3.5 years, and when I took possession of that property, I was ecstatic about the ability to take control and be a steward and honor the resources of that land. My submission of that letter, which was received today because I live a busy life with young children and maintaining a 95-acre farm, so it did come in today, but none of the information that is in my letter of testimony is new. You will see I have submitted 4 letters, or 2 to the Planning Commission, and this is the second to the Board of Commissioners, and I have submitted all the well data that I aggregated with the help of the neighbors as well as the big game data. So I refer to those things and my previous language and my previous letters. So my property in particular, I do not succumb to any of the difficulties with my well flow. I'm very privileged, and I don't take that for granted. I am at the basin, at the bottom of the valley. So I receive all the runoff that comes from that top of that hill through the mountain and underground rivers, and it comes down and it flows into a waterway that then leads to the Spencer Creek. So I have wetlands on my land, and I honor that, and I realize the value that that serves to big game. Big game is throughout our properties. I've had people tell me, did you see the bear, the cub bear coming up your driveway? And I said, no, I did not see the cub bear. So they exist. We don't see them every day, but they're there. And all the submissions, I really want you to look through them. We have seen them on trail maps, trail cams looking straight onto the subject property where those animals were moving on a nightly basis. As far as the zoning goes and the rezoning, so I live on impacted forest land. I am F2 impacted. I'm not in peripheral, I'm impacted. So for me, I can only build one dwelling per 80 acres, and I honor that because I can understand that by chopping up the land, you are going to ruin not only the big game habitat, but also the resources that are there for both the humans who are on the land as well as the big game. And so it's clear to me, as I hope it is clear to you, that by taking that land and designating it as not forest land anymore, but non-resource, not worth anything, truly, and also taking it and moving it from what is currently a 40-acre minimum for that for F2 there and taking it and saying you can do RR5, it is against the plan that you guys have supported and voted for, and I hope that you uphold that because I'm trying to do my job to uphold it as well. Okay, I think that's all I have to say, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, item 6E is to allow responsive comments by staff. Do you have any responsive comments?
No.
Okay. Next, we'll ask Mr. Gilardi to come up for his rebuttal for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Commissioners. I want to respond quickly to a few things that you heard. First, the suggestion, as Mr. Malone put it, that this is a sleight of hand. I really take issue with that because it's not true. And I want to read a couple of things for you from the record, and for you, but also for the benefit of everyone behind us. First of all, the covenant. The subdivision covenant. It's in the record at page 952. Section 1 of the covenant. Declarant, for itself, its heirs, successors, and assigns prohibits further division of lot 11 and 12. Those are the two 40-acre lots. Section 3, this covenant is for the benefit of and is enforceable by the county and any member of the public. This covenant may be enforced through judicial proceedings in Lane County Circuit Court. Section 4, this covenant runs with the land and is binding on the owners of lot 11 and 12 in perpetuity. Section 7, if any legal proceeding is commenced for the purpose of interpreting or enforcing any term of this covenant, the prevailing party is entitled to attorney fees. That's a very strong legal document. In addition, the decision that the board made puts what's called a site review overlay on the property to alert the staff in case anyone ever tries to further develop this property. They would have to go through a land use process. The suffix is on there to prevent them from going through that land use process, and anybody can sue them if they try to go through that process. So the suggestion that we're going to further subdivide this property is just not true. Second, I'll skip it. Second, the nature of the EC analysis. I think Mr. Malone made some good comments here, and I want to respond to him. What I said was that EC is a policy analysis, and Mr. Malone correctly said, well, that doesn't mean it's not based on substantial evidence in the record. And the confusion there is that oftentimes when you have an application like this, the applicant, usually through a land use planning consultant, will come in and will prepare this EC in order to pull together all the documentation that's needed. And oftentimes that does include factual evidence about the nature of the resource and whatnot. What's different about the findings that we propose in the remand is, all that stuff already happened in the last round. There were actually 3 different ECs, the factually based ECs that were provided by the applicant. Those were based on the proposal of 5-acre residential lots, 14 rural residential lots. And what those analyses concluded was, as a factual matter, was that it would not impact big game. And so the EC analysis that we are proposing in the findings, the policy analysis, it draws from all that factual material in the record. It's all very specifically cited throughout those findings. Mr. Malone also suggested that he pulled up some old comments from ODFW and suggested that ODFW opposes this application. That's not true. ODFW's comments were based on the original proposal, again, for the 5-acre rural residential lots. The proposal was specifically scaled back to be less than one dwelling per 40 acres, and ODFW did not comment on the revised application. Next, I want to speak to the wildlife evidence. Now, the opponents are correct that they have produced quite a bit of evidence of all the wildlife on their property. And that's wonderful, and you know what? The original findings were mistaken on that point. And I actually went to the staff before the board approved the decision in 2018 and said, you know, shouldn't we revise these findings given that they were written before we went through this process before the board and there are some issues? And I was told, no, it's not our process. We can't do that. So the opponents are correct. There is a lot of wildlife on the property, but there's no evidence that, you know, 2 new dwellings on 130 acres is going to impact that wildlife. The facts in the record are that many of the opponents here live on very small parcels, and they are asserting and have provided evidence that they have lots of wildlife. So logically, there's no reason why there couldn't be 2 more houses on 130 acres and there wouldn't be the same wildlife there. That's the evidence in the record. Third, I want to talk quickly about Measure 49. Again, the opponents are trying to punish the applicant for having pursued a Measure 49 development in the past. This was an issue that we discussed in 2018. The opponents chose not to challenge the Measure 49 issue before LUBA. Therefore, under what's called the law of the case doctrine, they've waived that issue here. Finally, on the groundwater issue, they're relitigating the competing evidence that was there on groundwater. The facts are that there's only 1 new well going in. The 7-acre rural residential lot is going to be on a community water system. That water system's under strict controls, no evidence that it's not functioning properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, I'm concluding the hearing, and I wanted to make it clear that let me read this remaining bit of information here. We want to state, of course, that oral and written argument must be directed toward applicable approval standards and criteria limited to the LUBA remanded issues. We want to remind people that failure to raise an issue with sufficient detail to give the hearing authority and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow a hearing authority to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages. In circuit court, appeal of a board remand decision is governed by ORS Chapter 197. At this time, we'll move to item 8A, which is that the board may ask questions of the director or parties. So do commissioners have questions for the director or parties? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I think if, some of the folks remember, I had a lot of questions about the ability to redevelop the remainder parcel on Measure 49, but that wasn't pressed legally, so that issue is gone now, unfortunately. I also expressed some concerns about the RR5 zoning at the time of approval, but at the time we got to an approval of this, we got to the point where staff felt there had been enough changes in the proposal and enough findings written and evidence provided by the applicant to address some of the issues. Mr. Clark, I want to just, real quick reiterate what we're being asked to do here today as a board is to make a decision on whether or not the applicant has done enough to rewrite their findings and arguments based on the record, because on a remand we don't get to add new evidence, right?
Not in this remand.
Okay.
There is, if the applicant wishes or needs to come up with new evidence to satisfy what LUBA's decision, then they can ask for evidentiary hearing, but that wasn't done here.
Okay, so on this particular one, all we're really trying to do is make a decision whether he's addressed the assignments of error in the remand from LUBA.
Correct.
And it has to be based on the existing record. So all the testimony that reiterated the existing record is basically just a reiteration. It's not, that testimony didn't address whether or not the new findings proposed by the applicant or not met the assignments, address the assignments of error correctly.
Right, and I think that's really the difficult task for all of you, is to try to parse out from what you heard and what you've read sort of evidentiary statements from arguments that are addressing the failures that LUBA found with respect to Goal 4 and Goal 5.
Great. I just want to clarify that a little bit so people understand. LUBA actually agreed with almost everything that was said here in their assignments of error. You know, they speak specifically about wildlife on page 36 when they have that assignment of error. They speak specifically about water in their sub-assignment of error on page 27. And they address the issue of big game on page 24 in their assignment error also. So we don't need to hear more of the same evidence. So I just want to make clear that all that evidence was part of the record, that LUBA assigned errors, saying that the application didn't address those well enough. So the question is has the applicant come back based on the existing record and provided findings that adequately address those assignments of error, specifically in the LUBA remand? And I'm looking at staff now, and this is planning staff somewhat, and they're basically telling us in their staff report that they have not met that bar.
And let me frame things a little bit, if I could. The findings should be correctly viewed as this board's findings or not.
Yeah, we'll have to adopt whatever the applicants.
Right. Well, and what we've done is typically, the applicant will propose findings. It's perfectly fine with staff to work with the applicant on the findings where we think they are missing things, either before or after meeting with the board. The real issue is whether there's evidence in the record that would support an approval or not, and if the findings adequately point out where that evidence is. So that said, I'll put you to Ms. Wright.
So I guess, could you address quickly where staff feels the applicant has not met the burden of the assignment of addressing the assignments of error in the remand? Staff recommendation is for us to deny and send the applicant back to the drawing board to address the remand issues. Can you kind of maybe quickly just remind us of where you feel that they've been inadequate in those assignments of error?
Staff tried to detail the insufficiencies in the staff report on pages 6 and 7 of each step. I'd have to be reading kind of verbatim from the staff report to go over those.
I can quickly go back and read myself also, if I can get back to page 6 and 7 from page 50-something of 292.
Good luck with that.
Oh, gosh. Don't we love electronics instead of having paper copies? So I guess,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I'll finish up my comments real quickly. I'm looking at staff as our professionals reviewing this and making a recommendation to the board. We've got planning expertise and legal expertise recommending that we deny the application's remand application and send them back to do more work. It doesn't mean that they're done. And like you said, they could ask for an evidentiary hearing, which opens the record again, which is a different process. But right now, I'm kind of leaning towards staff's recommendation because I am a little concerned that without new evidence, it's pretty difficult to address some of what was requested in the remand in those 3 assignments of error. So kind of hard for me to go on the existing record and say we've met that burden.
Just to give the board some idea of some of the options that staff has given the board, one is to move to set a third reading and deliberation on the ordinance as directed by the board and return by a date certain. Another is, following deliberation today, move to deny the application and direct staff to prepare an order with appropriate findings for final action as directed by the board and return on a date certain. And 3, if the owner of the property, Lane County, and the appellants mutually agree, the parties may enter into mediation as provided by ORS Net 197.860 prior to the expiration of the initial 120-day period. Don't know if that's happened or not. The application is deemed terminated if the matters are not resolved through mediation. So those are 3 options that staff has presented. I just wanted to mention too, and this is, as you may all know, the public hearing, maybe not all the commissioners remember, but Commissioner Farr and me and Commissioner Bozovich, along with the other 2 commissioners then in office, we did hold a public hearing on June 5, 2018, and that was a pretty lengthy hearing, comparable to today, actually even longer. But unfortunately for me, a very sad thing happened in my life, namely that my mother died on August 18, and then the board held the deliberations and held a vote of 4-0 on August 21, 2019. And in my 23 years as a commissioner, I have missed 2 board meetings, and that was one of the 2 board meetings I've missed in 23 years. So I'm sorry that I didn't participate in that deliberation. For my 2 cents worth, I think that the testimony in the record, the evidence in the record does demonstrate that the applicant has failed to meet their burden of proof, and that we should deny the application. Other commissioners? Commissioner Buck.
Question for staff is regarding your recommendation of item number 2, which our chair read. What is the date certain available? Should we move a motion?
It's something that we can discuss today. If we would get to that motion, I do have calendars here.
And just to clarify that those 3 options are among the many options that you may have. If board wants to further deliberate as to yes or no, you can set it for another reading, which would need to be a date specific in order to deliberate to a yes or a no. That leaves the options open. For example, if you wanted more analysis or a bullet point list that maybe would make it easier to refer or to see the items where we think findings are missing, or maybe there's not evidence in the record to support a finding. Staff can do that. Option number 2 is essentially you've deliberated, you decided the answer is going to be no, and then we just need to come back with an order that details that. That does not need to be a date specific, so you can put it on the next, because it's not an ordinance, so there wouldn't be a reading, it'd just be an order. You can put it on the next available date.
Okay, further deliberation?
Who has it?
Yeah.
Did you had your hand up?
Actually, I'm thinking a little bit more. Go ahead.
Okay. First off, I would like to share with the applicant that actually it was not this board that made that decision. This board is a bit different than the previous board. So consequently, I appreciated, even though it was a reiteration of what some of the commissioners have heard before, a human face and listening to both sides, even though I read a lot of documents. I have a question and then I guess a statement. My question is, several people mentioned that they had emailed information to us that we hadn't received. Could you tell me what that was all about?
Well, I'll let Ms. Wright follow up on this, but initially I'll note that given the nature of where we are in remand and working toward an on-the-record hearing, there's a danger in simply forwarding on to the commissioners things that come into planning on a particular file, because there's been no advice to you about what consideration you should make of that letter. For example, if it's a purely paragraph to paragraph of new evidence, then it's not appropriate to give it to you prior to an on-the-record hearing. If it is a letter from the attorney, which is very clearly argument, which points out references to the existing record, then that's fine. And so that enters into the sort of whole timing of what you get when. It's easier for us to give you information and the advice that goes with it if we do it all at once. And so I think that's typically why staff will hold on to submissions they get and give them to you in bunches. So,
I'm sorry.
So that's why we bunched them all in one email from this morning. At 9:30, we emailed about 8 or 9 letters that we received all at once. It was just logistically easier to do it that way, too.
So I guess for commissioners that have been here when this occurred, there's nothing new there, so I get that. But I can say that we were in a Board of Commissioners meeting starting at 9 o'clock, so there wasn't really time to bone up on and review all the information people here apparently have spent some time putting together prior to right now. I tend to agree with Commissioner Bozovich on this. I tend to defer to, I observe the Planning Commission denied this. The staff recommendation is to deny this.
Mind you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but mind you, the Planning Commission denial was a very different application.
Understood, but I was reviewing sort of the sequence prior to my being here.
Yeah.
Perhaps I shouldn't have done that, perhaps I misstated. But nonetheless, it's my, and no new evidence has been developed. So it's my inclination now to go with staff recommendation.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. My questions were more or less surrounding the timing that Commissioner Book asked the questions about. What is the January 7th date that's recommended? It said that in order to meet the deadline that we would have to hear it on January 7th?
I don't think there is a deadline by which you need to hear it.
Okay.
I think it's mostly a practical requirement for staff to have time to develop findings,
Okay.
yes or no, or to massage what's there.
Then I have a question. Is it okay for me to tell these folks here how beautiful a place they live? That is okay?
And how much we envy them?
How much I envy you? I do. In fact, I drive that area frequently, and I would understand any reluctance that you have on your part to see any further development in the area that you live. I live on a 4,500 square foot lot inside the urban growth boundary, and that's where we've chosen to live. You've chosen to live in a very different place. Mrs. Clarkson, you said that you have built a home in a forest, which you gladly share with the animals, and you listed the animals, and said you have photos that you'd show. You're painting a bucolic picture directly adjacent to the urban growth boundary, which is pretty rare. And so I understand the heart that you feel for the place that you live. I understand it. I love that area myself. I take my grandbaby for a drive around there just to get him to go to sleep, usually. But so it boils down to, in no small faction, which lawyer do we believe? Because they're each calling the other one a liar, So which one do we believe? So thank you.
Commissioner Buck.
I just wanted to add that I have the same concern that Commissioner Berney brought up. I happen to have had a chance over the lunch break to review some emails and read all the material that everybody submitted. I would say that that is generally not enough time. It makes more sense if we're having something like that to give us a little bit more leeway to, at least 24 hours in advance to be able to read those things. I don't know what
And a
You
lot
would
of,
say the rules about that.
yeah, a lot of times it's out of staff's control. You'll know some of the letters are dated today, and so there's only so quick we can turn around. We may want to,
Yeah.
Mr. Malone's letter came in today.
I could
September
understand if
17th.
some came in this morning, but for those, that have submitted before,
We may want to
Preparing.
explore rules that require things come in so many days before your hearing date.
that was where I was heading, is I don't know what the rules are about that, and if we don't have any rules, perhaps we should discuss that.
Yeah.
I live not too far from this particular area, and yes, it is very beautiful, Commissioner. I would like to move to deny the application and direct staff to prepare an order with the appropriate findings for final action for ordinance number PA 1360 as directed by the board and return on January 7th, 2020 at 1:30 in Harris Hall.
May take staff a little longer to prepare findings on that. I'll refer you to Ms. Wright.
So if we could propose a date of January 28th for the board's agenda item, that would be great. My internal supplemental cover memo with the order and the findings would have to be done internally, like by January 10th. So I would need some time to prepare that before January 10th. And with the holidays coming up, that might be difficult.
I can amend that to January 28th, 2020.
Before I second that, can you add closing the public hearing to your
And
motion?
closing the public hearing.
And
So I hear a motion by Commissioner Buck to close the public hearing and move to deny the application, direct staff to prepare an order with appropriate findings for final action on ordinance PA 1360 as directed by board and return at January 28, 2020 at 1:30 PM in Harris Hall. Is there a second to this motion?
second.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Bozievich. So moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Bozievich to deny the application, direct staff to prepare an order, and come back and present it to the board for a vote on January 28, 2020. And the motion was for 1:30 PM. Do we need a 1:30 PM? I didn't think so.
Anytime, no.
Didn't think so. But that was the motion that included 1:30? Yes, sir.
Just share with the board that you do have a pretty full meeting that date, and Mr. Chair, you will be out at the United Front in Washington DC. So I know we have conflicts on either ends, and there's not a perfect
Yeah,
date,
I'll
but I
be
just want
gone
you to know it's a
again.
full meeting, and we'll have at least one commissioner out.
Yeah, that was something that I had thought in the back of my mind that at least one commissioner, maybe more, will be gone that day. So is that, in fact, the best day? Maybe we should have it the
Apparently,
following.
we have 3 items that are on that, at that meeting that are 60-minute items.
Yeah.
So that,
Well, I would like to see us move that to one more week so I can participate in that. Is that okay?
Yes, I can, I'm open to the friendly amendment of changing that date to February 4th, 2020.
Okay. Is that okay with the second?
No time certain on that.
No time certain?
Certain.
Okay, no time certain.
The second's good with it.
And we'll change it to February 4, 2020. No time certain, sometime on the 4th of February 2020. Okay. Further discussion on the motion. Commissioner Bernie.
I don't want to lose what Commissioner Buck said about let's develop a policy to see information prior to. I think that's really critical. And before we vote, I just wanted to point out that up until this day, our chair said he'd never missed a board meeting. I learned today he's missed 2, and I've learned today he's going to miss a 3rd.
There you go.
I have nothing substantive as it relates to the motion.
I have it up my sleeve that maybe the board meeting will not go forward on the 28th of January, but that has yet to be revealed. Regarding the motion, I just wanted to make a comment on this last-minute submittal thing. This is always a problem, because if we cut off the submittals, the board agenda comes out on Thursday. It's published on our website on Thursday. If we make the cutoff before the weekend, then a lot of people who are looking and following our board work, they look at the board agenda and they learn that the cutoff was 2 days before, 3 days before the agenda. And so as much as it's difficult for us to read things when we're in the board meeting, and maybe even impossible, there's a drawback to cutting off submissions when we announce we're going to have a public hearing and people who can't come are submitting things. So I would agree with commissioners who are concerned about last-minute submissions, and maybe we could have maybe a twofold process, and we'll discuss this at some other point, but a twofold process whereby we have a sort of materials that are submitted at the time of the packet being due. And so those are shared not only with the board, but with the public in the packet, so that that information is widely distributed, or at least available. And then for those items that come in after your deadline, which I understand your deadline normally, Ms. Wright, is about 2 weeks ahead of that, right?
It's longer than that.
Even longer. So maybe at the point of your submission of your materials, which could be 3 weeks ahead, whatever we've received by 3 weeks, legal staff makes a decision, you make a decision of what's appropriate to be put in the record, and then that's put up on the website with the packet. And then after that period, that 21 days or so before the hearing or decision, yeah, there's always a risk that last-minute stuff comes in. And one of the risks of last-minute stuff coming in might not get read because it's last minute. But at least people have a right to give their point of view. At any rate, let's have further deliberation on the motion to set the denial for February 4. Commissioner Bozevich.
So I'm supporting this motion, and it's not because I don't feel that the applicant can't address the remand. I just believe that the process of not opening up the evidence and providing new analysis can cure some of the assignments of error. I agree with staff on that. So just letting everybody know out there that I don't believe this is the end in some ways. As long as you're holding a hearing, we cannot make people submit a certain date ahead of time because the record's open until we close that hearing. People can walk into this hearing and hand us written material, and it becomes part of the record. Now, how much time we have to absorb that and make a good decision is a different story. And what surprises me is almost all the testimony we got today in writing by the email was basically reiteration of prior record. The only one that actually addressed the issues of the remand and whether or not the findings were correct for the remand was the one we got from the attorney that knows that we are under deadline and multiple stuff, and that arrived today. So it seems to me that if the attorney really wants us to look at stuff, maybe that should have come a few days sooner. Just saying. Yeah. But it seems to be a fairly regular practice. We'll get stuff from attorneys on the day of an evidentiary hearing. So that's part of the reason why we can go to further readings. If we had thought that submittals from the and record needed to have further look before we deliberate, we could have said we're going to close the hearing and the evidence, and we'll come back for another another reading and set of deliberations, and not have directed staff to prepare something until that further reading. So just know that we always have that ability, that we can hold the hearing, people can submit stuff we haven't had a chance to review, we can close the record and come back and deliberate later once we've had time to digest the evidence. That's always an option to us. we don't need to have some, people have to show up prior to and submit everything in writing, 10 days ahead, so we have time to look at it. Public hearings, when we're collecting evidence, the reason you hold public hearings is to collect evidence. So, but I just wanted to explain that I'm supporting the motion just because I feel at this time, without additional analysis, it's impossible to meet the remand conditions that LUBA set.
Okay, further discussion, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a moment to talk about residential development in general. I would like to think that I'm talking to a room full of people who agree with me that residential development should occur inside of urban growth boundaries as much as possible, and that we make residential adjustments outside the urban growth boundary really only as needed, because it's not the cheapest place to build by any stretch of the imagination, so we're not going to build typically affordable housing outside the urban growth boundaries. But I'd like to say this. In 2009, we began a discussion called Envision Eugene. And during that discussion, it became evident early that we needed to add residential land outside of Eugene's existing urban growth boundary. That was the first decisions that were realized. The inventory was later revised to say that we didn't need more land based upon the 20-year supply outside the urban growth boundary. But during that early phase, we were looking at areas outside, immediately adjacent to the urban growth boundary where residential development could occur. Your area was one of them. You may recall that. And if that had happened, it was determined to be too steep a slope in most of the area. So it wouldn't have been very easy to supply water, for instance, and transportation, for instance. So it was ruled out early. But at the end of Envision Eugene, we decided that there was no more residential land needed outside of Eugene's existing urban growth boundary. I disagreed with that. I disagree with that to this day. When it's time for us to look at the urban growth boundary, if we're not going to look at forest land and add area outside of the urban growth boundary to rural residential, then we need to be very serious about understanding that in order to provide affordable housing to the vast numbers of people that are moving here, are graduating from high school here, and ultimately potentially could move here because of climate change, then we need to understand that if we're going to constrain our growth in residential to inside an urban growth boundary, we have to take a judicious look at what the urban growth boundary looks like today and what it needs to look like for the future to maintain that 20-year supply of land that we're required to maintain. So thanks for being here this morning. You do live in a beautiful spot. I drive it often, and I have photos.
Okay.
I got more today, by the way.
Further discussion on the motion to set the vote on the denial for February 4, 2020. Seeing no further requests for deliberation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The motion is adopted by a vote of 5-0. All commissioners present voting in the affirmative. Thank you very much for your observations and participations today. We're now ready to call up Matt Tarnoff, Road Maintenance Planner. And while you're coming up, I'll read the item 12B, Order 19-12-17-11, in the matter of adopting a Public Works road maintenance policy for ice and snow removal and cleanup of roads. With us to discuss this today is Matt Tarnoff, Road Maintenance Planner for Lane County Public Works. Welcome to Mr. Tarnoff. We set this up for a 10-minute, is it a 10-minute presentation? Okay. 10-minute presentation.
Follow your leads.
And so, without further ado, I'll ask Mr. Tarnoff to pull that microphone as close to your mouth as feasible and appropriate so we can all hear you, and give us your staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair and fellow commissioners. Thank you for your endurance today. The agenda item summary. The board is being asked to approve a formal policy for ice and snow removal cleanup of roads to guide public works maintenance and efficiently allocating its resources and effectively responding to ice and snow conditions that cause unsafe driving conditions. I would like to point out as kind of a sub-note, there's a difference between...
With the folks in the back, please retire Thank you so
Sorry,
much.
it's hard to kind of listen to two conversations at once.
No, I understand.
Very good.
Three, sorry.
Please go ahead. We'll
Yep.
restore any time lost to inefficiency here.
No worries. I just want to draw a distinction between policy and plan. You'll hear these two words throughout this presentation. The policy is the support of the overall plan. The plan is what the day-to-day operators will see as their directive. The background and implications of actions. This is a policy that, or I'm sorry, this is a plan that has been in place since 1994 and has had several revisions since then. Currently, we're on the 2015 revision, and we also have a 2019 revision ready to go. Working with County Council, we thought it is pertinent to have the board look at these policies and adopt them prior to releasing this latest revision. In the past, my predecessors had gone to the Road Advisory Committee, and they collectively recommended that the board does look at this plan. That has never been found to be something that had occurred. So now we are pushing it through. The Lane County Public Works Road Maintenance staff has prepared and implemented and continues to develop this plan. Staff reviewed other public agencies, including ODOT, Deschutes County, Benton County, Siskiyou County down in California, City of Eugene, and also City of Portland. So this is an amalgamation of all of those current plans. What are the policy issues? Ice and snow conditions obviously present significant safety hazards to users of public roads within the county's jurisdiction. When such conditions occur, public roads maintenance must allocate limited resources to address a broad and variable range of hazards across a large geographical area. In order for road maintenance staff to establish a plan for addressing such conditions quickly and effectively, it is important that the policy priorities be considered and established by the board to guide the developments of the plan. And again, there's that distinction between the policy and the plan. By considering and adopting this set of policies, such as those contained in this memo and proposed order, the board will give road maintenance staff the policy direction necessary both to establish the plan and to make decisions within the policy and carry out the plan when such conditions arise. By doing so, the board will ensure that Public Works road maintenance staff act within the discretionary immunity granted for the exercise of the scope of their duties. The ice and snow removal policy attached with this memo will provide clear policy guidance, including risk allotment and prioritization within which Public Works road maintenance staff can finalize an operational plan and carry out their duties safely and effectively in ice and snow events. We ask that the board review that this plan will protect and enhance the safety and health of county residents by keeping critical roadways at maximum operational capacity, enabling residents to access vital services. That this plan will manage equitable services for urban, rural residents to enhance opportunities to access to employment, education, and entertainment. This plan will also focus on strategic infrastructure maintenance and investments that have the highest return of safety. And last but not least, that this plan will facilitate operational effectiveness and provide staff with concise direction that will forge an embedded commitment to delivering value and service to the residents of the county. Financial and resource considerations, as the tables on the following pages illustrate, financial resource demands can vary drastically from year to year depending on the frequency, type, and intensity of the winter events. I could draw your attention to page 3 of our document here. What you see is the ice and snow activities totals. De-icing, sanding, and sweeping, and snow removal are activities that take place during and around active winter weather events. These activities are driven through policies established in the ice and snow removal plan. Page 4, item 2 there, ice and snow activities compared to storm cleanup. So what you see in the goldenrod color there is the totals that are spent during the previous seven winters for these activities. Obviously, last year was a banner year for the intensity of the storm, and so just to give some contrast and comparison to the events that lead up to, I'll call it extracurricular activities. What are the health implications? Removal of ice and snow from Lane County roadway facilities has very wide-ranging effects on the health of the greater community. Access to all services of wide-ranging variety are more or less at the mercy of how well we respond to these events. There are relatively minimal environmental quality issues surrounding our actions. Although Lane County road maintenance staff implement industry standard tools, techniques, and materials, the following statements still remain true: that sand applied for traction in sensitive areas can accumulate and impede and/or alter water flow on roadway facilities as designed. Magnesium chloride, which is an agent that we use to slow the forming of ice on roadways, has the potential to accumulate and may affect water, soil, and plants near the road facility. The safety, ice and snow events compound safety issues on and around roadway facilities. Emergency response to vital services may be delayed, and constricted road widths may force cyclists and pedestrians to be in direct danger with vehicles. We'll skip down to analysis, make sure my time is here. The very nature of using heavy equipment to manage ice and snow events place almost everything within the adjacent county right-of-way at potential risk. An example, damage to property may be incurred from just the snow being projected from a plow's blade. Through the lens of discretionary immunity, Lane County stands to benefit approving and being fully aware of an ice and snow removal policy that guides and protects staff from potential liabilities. The response to cold weather climatic events has far-reaching socioeconomic impacts. Limited access to hospitals, service providers, and for emergency vehicles may have immediate and long-term effects for vulnerable populations. Impeded access to schools, employment, food, and supplies may be felt by the entire community. Road facilities left unmaintained may place drivers and other road users at risk of injury and property, both public and private, at risk of damage. Prioritizing roads in a formal manner creates a framework that uses county resources efficiently and effectively, rating road facilities based on attributes such as usage, proximity to services, physical characteristics, and potential alternative routes, compartmentalizes an otherwise daunting task of maintaining the free flow of goods and services within Lane County. What are the alternatives and options? The board has the option to adopt this policy, decline this policy, or alternatively request that the language and intent be modified in such a manner as to include more concise directives to staff that is charged with executing action items in the event of wintry weather. It is the recommendation of the Transportation Advisory Committee and the Lane County Road Maintenance staff that the board approve the ice and snow removal policies attached as Exhibit A. The recommendation is warranted to provide direction to staff and maintain discretionary immunity while developing a plan to support Lane County residents during cold weather events. Timing and implementation, as noted previously, the ice and snow plan, again, that's that March 2015 revision, is currently in place and being followed as needed. This opportunity lends itself to edits and/or additions to the language and intent of the overarching ice and snow removal policy. Following the motion to approve the ice and snow removal policy, a new revision of ice and snow removal plan will be released. The new revision may include any content changes deemed necessary by the board. If I could turn your attention to the actual policy, which would be page 8 of 10 here. Policy need, I think we covered that already. Just to delineate what the service priorities are, we look at such things as road functional class, traffic volumes, availability of alternate routes, sensitive areas such as steep grades, curves, intersections, or other potentially hazardous areas. Also roads with adequate room to maneuver county equipment, and probably one of the most important is emergency vehicle access. The snow removal plan will be activated at the discretion of our zone supervisors. Factors leading to activation may include evaluations of conditions at 12 and 24 hours after a storm has started. Likewise, snow removal may begin when accumulations reach 3 inches on county roads and it's continuing to snow. Sanding applications have a similar priority, again, mostly focusing on sensitive areas, curves, steep grades, etc. Anti-icing application. Once again, these are applied to only sensitive areas where ice may be prone to be forming. Cleanup, once again, following these same types of priorities, residual sweeping and flushing of sand from roads and on-street bicycle lanes will be performed as soon as reasonably possible. Travel lanes will be swept as the priority, followed by road shoulders, and bike lanes will be subsequently swept. Dedicated bike paths, the county will not touch any dedicated bike path. We are only considering road facilities. Local access roads, we don't touch local access roads, but there's a blurb here and there letting people know. The snow removal policy on mailboxes, driveways, and sidewalks. In the process of snow removal, mailboxes may be damaged or access to mailboxes obstructed. Driveways may be closed and sidewalks may be covered. It will be the responsibility of abutting landowners to remove such snow. Only mailboxes physically hit by county equipment will be reinstalled. Mailboxes knocked down by flying snow will not be reinstalled by the county. It will be the responsibility of the property owner to provide clear access up to the mailbox for the postal carrier. The county is not responsible for opening driveways that have access onto county roads. Property damage. Public Works is not responsible for damage to privately owned landscaping or structures, including but not limited to fences, signs, curbs, and wires that are installed within the county public right-of-way. The damage precautions. Signs and posts, reasonable caution will be taken to avoid damage to signs, mailboxes, posts, and delineators during snow removal. However, adjacent buildings or facilities may be damaged by the flying snow from snowplow operations. Parked and unattended vehicles. Reasonable care will be exercised in removing snow in the vicinity of vehicles parked adjacent to county roads, consistent with the necessity of completing the required work. However, vehicles parked and unattended in the right-of-way are left at the owner's risk. The county is not responsible for damage or repairs from snowplow or sanding operations. The following section breaks down our priority levels into 4 categories. I don't know that I need to belabor you with the details there. I would be more than happy to continue reading, but we obviously have a graded road rating system here with higher usage, higher access taking priority over everything. And that is about all I have for you at this point. I would gladly entertain questions or.
Okay. Questions, comments? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. I find this fascinating, not, I'm sure, as fascinating as Commissioner Bozovich finds it. So, and when would we have a snow event that would make you want to revise our practices? Just kidding. Just have a question. The men and women, the operators who operate the equipment, are the ones who are tasked to move the plan forward, to actually execute the plan. And my question is, as you develop the plan that you presented to us today, at what point did you have an opportunity to engage the operators in the writing of the plan?
My engagement was with mainly supervisors and what we call our RM3s, the road maintenance, the highest level of operators that you can.
All of whom have been operators at the
at some point in their career, and engaging their supervisors to establish what makes the most sense. And so we have sort of a calculus that we go through to get the objective priority, but then I depend on, say, the zone supervisors and the people that have been doing this for many years to tell me, oh, this doesn't make sense, or we have a better route over here. And so there was a very intimate interaction with each of the 5 zones to establish what is currently in place.
Your response is exactly what I'd hoped, that you did engage them, because occasionally, not occasionally, but often, probably daily, they say, well, why are we doing it this way?
Sure.
If we just did this ever so slightly. And during the last snow event, you covered this a little bit, we did have some complaints about driveways being blocked. Well, that's a hazard of clearing roads. How about local access roads? Do you make certain that local access roads aren't blocked? Is that a part of the plan?
So we don't do anything with local access roads as per the county regulations.
But as far as plowing the road, does the plan still continue to plow right in front of the local access road, thereby making it unpassable until somebody, no, I see Orrin shaking the head.
Yeah, Orrin might not be able to speak a little bit more to that, but it's not I'm not aware of this. I'd have to follow up on that one.
Commissioner, we treat an LAR just like any other intersection.
That's okay, good. That was what I'd hoped and expected. So anybody who said that our local access road was blocked, it was either temporary or inadvertent.
That would be a correct assessment.
We would hope. Okay. Well, good. A lot of work went into this, and once again, I find it scintillating because when it does, when the event happens and the men and women who are operating have to get out at 2 a.m. and leave their families at home to fend for themselves, and it's great that they have a plan that has been revised, that is modern, and that they can trust to be doing the right thing at the right time and in the right order. So, well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, other comments or motion? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So anti-icing chemicals, are a huge debate out there.
Oh, yeah.
Magnesium chloride has got detrimental effects on concrete they've now kind of discovered. And, even though it's kind of safe for vegetation more than a lot of stuff, and there's been some concern that recently that some of our de-icing work actually may have made roads slick. And I understand, they're also, and City of Portland went away from some of the pre-spray stuff to actually going to salt in certain conditions, what I consider the typical salt that's used on the East Coast, which eats cars. See a lot of older cars here because they don't use rock salt. Talk a little bit about the actual anti-icing chemicals we use here in Lane County and why we choose what we use, maybe, because that's kind of gotten to be a little bit of a controversy because, Portland got caught bad with that one storm in the hills, not last year, but the year before, where they made a change to their snow and ice removal policies to allow for using salt.
So the magnesium chloride, for all my research, shows that it is the least corrosive. It's the most subdued way of handling this type of ice buildup. And the intent, again, is to lower the temperature of the freezing point for water on road surfaces. In the past, we had used magnesium. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. What's that? It was CalMag. I'm sorry. Yeah. So that one was a lot more corrosive and much harder to handle, from my understanding. I'm not sure if I could go into details of why and how that all these decisions happened prior to my being here, but the industry standard is to use the most mild chemical on the roads.
Yeah, I know the city of Eugene for a while went to something that is related to vinegar, basically, but it doesn't have quite the temperature lowering effect of, because I think magnesium chloride gets down to below zero, like -12 or something. I can't remember what the temperature it lowers freezing.
Yeah, the records I have say about 10 degrees above zero is where it starts to lose efficacy.
Yeah. Where I think the vinegar, the acetate ones were not nearly as effective. They're just down in the low 20s.
Yeah, and just to follow some of Matt's comments is that mag chloride also has some of the effects of not just only being a rust inhibitor, it's also one of the ones that's less degrading to the environment, which was a big consideration in our program. Salt, as a straight product, ODOT is doing a lot of investigations on the I-5 corridor at this point, and we're staying kind of constant with that. But at this point, that's the only program I'm aware of using it in the state. I'm not sure what the city of Portland's doing. But again, we kind of looked at all those factors when we came down to a selection of a product that seemed to work. And recently you noted a comment about concerns with magnesium chloride in slick conditions. We followed up with some of those initial reports we received a few weeks ago, or months ago, I guess, at this point, looking at all those factors about was our product in the spec from the manufacturers, and everything else at this point that we've lined up shows that we apply at the rate within the range and with the product that's in the standards. So we're not sure if that was a contributory factor at all in those reports.
Everyone's always looking to point blame sometimes when they have a car wreck.
Yeah.
So it's never the driver's fault. All right. Well, thank you for going over that, because I know that's just been a real big issue, and I know it was a real controversy in Portland after that. They got caught flat-footed on that one ice storm. Fortunately, we don't get as many without the gorge influence.
Right.
Okay, further discussion, motion? Commissioner Buck?
I'll move approval of order, item 12B, order number 19-12-17-11, the matter of adopting a Public Works road maintenance policy for ice and snow removal and cleanup of roads as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Burney to approve Order 19-12-17-11 as presented. Further discussion? I just want to thank you and everyone else involved in bringing this policy forward. I think it's really important that we have this policy and that we have some specified ways to let people know what our priorities are and what they are not. And things like the driveway blockage or the not plowing the LARs, or you've got to make space for the postal vehicle. Those things, while it would be great if we could afford to do that in a timely fashion for everybody, we're talking about health and safety impacts and getting emergency vehicles through faster, getting medical help to people who may not be experiencing an emergency but are definitely in need of medical help. All of that goes to our main priorities. I appreciate that. And thanks so much for bringing it forward. And thanks to our legal folks for helping out as well. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. The order carries 19-12-17-12, 5-0. Board adopts the order. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Oh, and you know what? I think I read the wrong order.
17-11.
Yeah, it's 19-12-17-11 is approved by a vote of 5-0. Thank you so much. And thanks, Commissioner, for pointing that out. Okay, next up is order number 19-12-17-12. And this is item 13A, in the matter of adopting the 2019 update to the Lane County Emergency Operations Plan. Patience Winningham, Lane County's emergency manager, is here. We set this up for a 20-minute item, 10 minutes of presentation, 10 minutes of board questions. And welcome to our award-winning Patience Winningham. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. It's almost over.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
You're this much closer, right?
That's one way to look at it.
So I'm going to show you the emergency operations plan, and I made some updates. I've taken some time to actually go through the basic portion of the plan. So the emergency operations plan for the county is actually quite extensive, but there's one portion that's available for the public. So this is the piece that is formally promulgated and available on our website. It has not been posted on our website pending your formal adoption of the basic plan. So I'm going to show you a few changes that I presented to the management team 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And the changes that will affect them and us as an organization, most specifically the plan's maintenance schedule that's available on page 7. And in page 7, it calls out the pieces of the plan that are the responsibility of members of our organization. So specifically emergency management and our emergency support function. So you'll recall back in July, we had met and we developed this policy guide for senior and elected officials at our work session. And everybody got a copy of that, remember that? In that guide is our emergency support functions, and together I outlined who was the primary lead within our organization and who is our secondary supporting agencies or organization members for working on this document, because it's a living, breathing document that'll support our organization moving forward and planning for our overall preparedness, right? Our operations, which is extremely exciting. I presented that to the management team last week, and they're all extremely supportive and happy to move forward. And I also made the proposal to that group of an emergency management committee that's countywide. So it's comprised of representatives from all departments that will inform the plan. They'll be active participants in our planning for Where do we put resources, generators? Where do we put staff? How do we staff the Emergency Operations Center? Who are the staff that will fill the roles in an Emergency Operations Center, and how will they support us in our worst day? So we identified and clarified roles and responsibilities of all county departments within this portion of the basic plan. And that's outlined on page 34. Like I said, this is a living, breathing document, and we'll be making changes as we go. We've scheduled a kickoff meeting with everybody in the organization, including the management team, on January 21st. I'd like to introduce you to Eric Anderson, who came with me this afternoon. He's our new emergency management analyst in emergency management, so the program is now fully staffed. He's 3 weeks new, so I got him introduced as quickly as possible, and told him the direction that we're going to go as an organization in emergency management. So with his support, we'll get this plan up to speed and a little bit more robust, more than it already is. So the pieces of the plan that you don't see, I'd like to go through those because we talked about them in July, but these are the pieces that we're working on right now in development. So an overall operational Annex 1, which is activating the EOC. Who do we notify? Who's briefing policy? How are we delivering briefings to the policy? That's you, the Board of Commissioners, and how are we sharing information with you in the next snow event, the ice event, wildfire situation. OA2, roles and responsibilities, will also be writing that document, identifying who an EOC manager is and what their responsibilities are in an emergency operations center, but across the board, all of those positions, and clearly outlining checklists, task lists, and how do they operate in an EOC environment, so I can Greg the Gregs of the world and bring him in quickly and say, here's your role today. You are now the liaison with policy, and these are the things you need to remember to do for the next 12 to 14 days. And then the declaration process. So we've talked a little bit about that, and that's why I produced this, because we didn't really have anything in place. But this includes the senior and elected officials guide on disaster declaration process. So finding those forms and cleaning them up so they're blank, so we could fill them out by hand if we needed to, but also know where they are electronically so that we can quickly fill them out and keep moving and not have to find it. Identify a process for declaring a disaster. We don't actually have it written down, but when we start to train and exercise, we'll train and exercise to operational annex number 3, because it's all written out there, right? And whose responsibility is what, and how are we going to get it done? If you had a chance to look at the emergency operations plan, there's a piece in there that I wasn't quite sure how it was working, but I took some time, and in the back there's some annexes. And you'll remember we met with the State Fire Marshal's Office and the Lane County Fire Defense Board Chief, and we talked about the unincorporated areas that weren't protected by fire. Well, I feel like that needs to be a part of this plan, so it's always in front of us. You talked about every year you wanted to review it and have a discussion. So in January, Steve Dingle got it on your calendar to remember, hey, this is something. Well, I actually added it to the plan. So every 2 years, we're looking at it again in the plan. I don't know if this will be exactly where it'll live in the basic plan, but I included the narrative that we got from the State Fire Marshal's Office, and I also included the boilerplate declaration that Steve Dingle had drawn up for us as well, so that it's clearly in front of us and it's available for the public, because I think that's a huge gap for the community, is they don't understand that this is a gap, that they don't have fire protection. This is what the process is for them, right? So another addition. And then the other piece that's not included in this plan, this stuff is covered in the plan, but it's kind of buried, and that's the debris management plan, a damage assessment plan, and an employee services annex. So those pieces they're buried in there, but they're not right out front and center of how do we support our staff so that they can come back to work and help us in our worst day. What's our plan? What's our process? And I've heard about that from the organization, from departments on, hey, so what are you going to do for me if I come to work and I stay here for 5 days, right? What about my family? What's the expectation? And working with HR to get that in this plan so that everybody, we can point them directly to the emergency operations plan. And then incident annexes, so being clear in how we're responding to specific incidents. If it's an earthquake scenario, if it's a wildfire scenario, if it's an airplane crash, right? What is our process and how are we going to get there and who's all involved? So we can test to the plan, those portions of the plan with the primary and secondary agencies that are supporting for those responses, right? So I just want to remind you, our emergency support functions, these are some of the things that you'll be seeing us drive to here in Lane County in ESF 1 and 3. So working with Orrin and his staff and Dan in Public Works and Transportation is extremely important. And we're already starting to cross-pollinate and collaborate with each other. And a fine example of that is the snow and ice emergency plan. They gave it to me and actually asked me if I had some feedback on the plan. And I shared it with the Lane County Fire Defense Board chiefs and asked them if they actually had some feedback on the plan when we're identifying priority routes and what's the response in the rural areas, and gave them an opportunity to chime in on that plan and if they had any additions to the way that they respond to clearing debris. So with that said, I asked the board formally promulgate the plan, and I'd open it up for questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Do commissioners have questions or comments? Commissioner Buck?
I just want to say that I'm impressed where we've been going, and especially with where you have been going on our entire emergency preparedness division. I've been attending many of those group meetings, and I think we're on such a wonderful trajectory. This seems to be like the basics, right? But we got to get through the basics and have that foundation before we can really go intergovernmental and work with all of our local and state agencies for planning for the big one or the next huge storm that comes our way. I'm really supportive of this particular adoption and just really want to express my gratitude with how much work you put in. Welcome our new employee in the division, because I know I'll be there in the meetings with you, and just know that I'm a big fan.
Thank you. I just want to let you know that this plan will mirror the same structure as the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield's plan. So it still has, if you went to Eugene or you went to Springfield and looked at their plan, it's exactly the same. It's a comprehensive preparedness guide that we're following. It's a national guidance that we're following, or federal guidance that we follow. So we should be able to cross-pollinate. And the City of Eugene has Emergency Support Functions 1. So does the City of Springfield. Everybody has an emergency support function 1 so that we're able to integrate quickly and work with each other on identifying resources.
Okay, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. A new employee in the department, wasn't that you just a minute ago?
Right, I feel like that, yes.
But so long that so much has happened. You know, on Friday, we had our Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. We reviewed our emergency management plan, and a very different mission. You know, how do you get those big pumps working as soon as possible? It's kind of low on the list, on the hierarchy list, but at some point it becomes a pretty important issue. And I asked the question, how are you coordinating with the county's emergency management plan? And it's more critical because most of MWMC's facilities are inside of the urban growth boundaries of the two cities involved. But they did say that their plan is looking at our plan and working in conjunction. Can you talk about that for a second?
I can speak to, from my Eugene role, the MWMC, and how, yes, they have generators all over and they understand where their critical points of failure are at the county level. Not yet, other than what I've learned from solid waste. I haven't been out there on a tour yet, but from what I understand, they've definitely been tapped or tested over the last couple of events, and they've got some stuff working really well out there.
And they do. And the City of Eugene is a large part of it, City of Springfield, but we do have some facilities in the county. And MWMC is not the only emergency plan that you overlap with. You know, there are other agencies that have emergency plans that that take care of critical elements of survival after an emergency.
Yeah.
hospitals, for instance.
Yep, and I overlap with the hospitals actually really well. The hospitals would embed in our emergency operations center depending on what the event were to be. So if it were a county-wide event, they would come to the county's emergency operations center and function out of there. During the last phone outage, I was actually at McKinsey Willamette, and their emergency manager called me, and I attended their briefing because we don't understand how phone outages impact hospitals. So I was able to attend that meeting, and it was very informative because you got to hear about how doctors couldn't call doctors, how hospitals have patients that come in and they're there for a service and then they need to be transported back. And they come via shuttle, and if their landlines are used to call for shuttle, they're stuck there. So at one point, after 7 hours of the phone outage, they had 50 people stuck in the wound care treatment facility, and how are they moving them? How are they getting them back if they can't make phone calls to get those folks home? And then also filling prescriptions is a huge gap as well. So, I mean, it only took 7 to 8 hours before they identified those huge issues for their hospital to continue to function.
Well, that's a good recital of what happened, and it gives me confidence that you are making certain that our plans are overlapping and working. You know, you look at one of the lines about 52 lines in as mass fatalities. You know, it's a long way down the plan, but it's something that you are taking into account. So
Yeah, it's a long list, and I have to prioritize, and the first thing on that list was a basic plan, get a basic plan updated and start focusing on our internal organization. So I've kind of separated the work with Eric, and I'll have him work with the internal staff to really get that emergency management committee up and running, get their training set in place, get a solid training and exercise plan going for our staff. But then I'm still focusing on our external partners and how can I help them, right? Get their planning going. The city of Florence, working with the city of Oak Ridge and making sure they get a solid emergency operation plan in place in order to function for the next event that should impact them.
And, last week we had some of the folks who were here receiving an award from recognition from Local 626, from the Public Works, and they mentioned you by name, as a matter of fact, during the event, which you were relatively new. And I'd love to be able to say, Patience, I love working with you, but really what I can accurately say and truthfully say is I love watching you work. I get to be a fly on the wall most of the time, and it really is poetry in motion. Well done.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun, it really is. But I planned a vacation, so I'm leaving on Friday, so if the atmospheric river comes to fruition, you'll need to call Greg.
Thank you. Okay. What's your number, Greg? I want to ditto what Commissioner Farr said about feeling comfortable with the person we have in charge for this. In California, interestingly, one of the things that's creating emergencies are cutting off the utilities and the energy when there are wildfires because of a massive disinvestment in that infrastructure. As a result, that state is now issuing RFPs for 400 battery storage units in shopping center parking lots across the state. Technology has created a 5 megawatt battery that takes up 3 parking places. And those batteries are going to feed those disruptions. My question to you, and really I'm not trying to get off, is just one of those multiple circles is energy. And I'm wondering, is part of the plan as you envision it, whether it's there or not, relating to the production and storage of energy in local areas so that as large, systems go out, there's local production? Is that a part of what you envision?
Yeah, so I moved from one hazard to the next, and mostly I've met this morning actually with the fire chief up McKinsey, Chief Busich, and we talked about all hazards evacuation planning, and we also talked about the rolling blackouts they're experiencing in Northern California and how we could anticipate seeing something like that here in our area in the next 5 years. I mean, quite frankly, we could see something like that, and asking the subject matter experts experts, what's your expectation on supplying power to your community should we move to a rolling blackout situation? And he was kind of like, well, I never really thought of it that way. We'll have to go back to the drawing board and look at it, because there is so much infrastructure that we have in place now, critical infrastructure that does have backup power, but the longevity that we've planned for them to maintain without commercial power is not substantial. It's not adequate enough. So we've looked at the 7-day model. We've looked at the 24-day model, and it's communications, right? The Verizon cell towers, the radios, the LRIG system, making sure that we've got a good solid plan on what's the backup power look like for our critical infrastructure. But now we have to turn to the other side of the coin, and what's the power solution for our vulnerable population? How are we supplying power to them and rolling back blackout scenarios? And what does that look like? And that's a question, that I don't know the answer to, but does anybody have a generator? Right? I mean, that's basically what I'm looking at. And the Public Utility Commission is extremely supportive and always there to help us. I've scheduled a meeting about phone outages because we've experienced 3 phone outages in our community in the last 6 months. That's been super impactful to our 911 centers, to all landlines, and then also impacting some of our cellular services. So the next question to the Public Utility Commission, which they're working on, they have the Governor's Wildfire Group that are working on rolling power outages, because it is happening in Southern Oregon, Josephine County, Jackson County, Douglas County. They're all working through what does a rolling power outage look like. And I'm a firm proponent of leaning forward as much as I'm humanly possible or capable of doing to pre-plan and look at those for the potential for us.
Yeah, the only cell phone outage I'm interested in is when lawyers can't talk to lawyers. But other than that, I'm sorry, that was a joke. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other comments on it? Okay, let me just say a couple things. One is I really appreciate your leadership on this, and I agree with you that first things first, do the basic plan, and then start working on the, peripherals and adding to it. One of the things, and I just got an email from a friend of mine who's a paramedic and forwarded it on to you about, the analogy that hit me was in the Swiss Alps, there are St. Bernards. I know this because I watched cartoons as a kid. There are St. Bernards that bring you emergency supplies of brandy. Have you seen those?
I thought there was something else in that barrel.
No, that's brandy underneath the dog's. Okay. No, I'm just giving her facts. It's been since the 1300s. Okay, so that's an emergency that they've planned for. And my question is, my friend who's a paramedic in Springfield said, well, what about things like, chainsaws out in rural schools, or, caches of something that's needed where the government buys these things but may not have the resources to actually use them, where a community could use them. And I don't know what that's called in the emergency management business. And by the way, I am against that St. Bernard thing, so let's don't do that. But I mean, as far as, water or maybe chainsaws or something that are useful in emergency, where we, the government, might have the resources to buy it. We don't have the resources to actually use it. And I know, that there might be tremendous legal liabilities associated with letting, children use, let's say, for example, chainsaws. But there are people that are trained for it, and maybe there's a way to have or maybe there's nonprofit groups, maybe the Boy Scouts, maybe the Explorer Scouts through the Lane County Sheriff's Office, other organizations that are nonprofit and are volunteer, who could use equipment. And I just want your opinion on that.
Sure. So I think you hit it on the nose. It's legality purposes, right? If we go and buy a bunch of chainsaws and somebody that doesn't have proper training goes out and operates it, then we're opening ourselves up to some sort of exposure. I don't think Steve's around to ask the total question on that one, but
take it from me. The answer is yes.
Yeah. So you'll hear me on NPR probably this weekend, and they did a a stit on community preparedness, so neighbors helping neighbors. So it's really important for neighbors to understand that they are the first responders until first responders arrive. So that's really been my podium that I've stood on, and when I go out in the community is you need to help yourselves and your neighbors, because it's going to be a while for help
Might
to
even
come.
want to start calling people that we typically call first responders, we want to start calling them second responders to pound in the idea that
yeah.
the first responder is the person that shows up first, and that often is not a firefighter, a police officer.
It's your family, right? It's your family or your neighbors. And when you live in a rural community like I do, it's 30 or 40 minutes before a volunteer firefighter can even get to your home. So you need to know who can do CPR, who understands what a stroke looks like, and empowering the individuals around you to know that information, right? So that they can save a life. But again, community preparedness, neighbors helping neighbors is a fine solution. Rural areas are quite different than urban areas, but in the urban areas here in Eugene, there are some very solid neighborhoods that are working on emergency planning for their neighborhoods, and they're doing training within their neighborhoods because they're training themselves. They're not asking the government to give them a bunch of resources. They're not asking the government to come give them training. They're giving themselves training. They're finding the individuals that have the skills and expertise to train themselves, to empower themselves to be prepared to take care of their neighbors.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're ready for a motion to approve the order. Commissioner Buck?
I'll move item 13A, order number 19-12-17-12, in the matter of adopting the 2019 update to Lane County's Emergency Operations Plan.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Bozovich to approve Order 19-12-17-12 as it appears in our board packet and the printed agenda on our internet. Further discussion? I'll just say thank you very much, and this is a first step of many toward a journey of 1,000 miles.
1,000 miles.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. And the order is adopted by a vote of 5-0 by the Board of Commissioners. Order is adopted. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Have a good vacation.
We're almost 2/3 of the way through.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Let's now go to item 14A, Commissioners' announcements. As I've been making these announcements every week, and thank you very much for following this guidance, please stay in touch with Ms. Jones regarding your schedule for any special or emergency meetings of the Board of Commissioners. We are expecting a massive atmospheric river that TV and radio are mentioning. I don't know if our weather watchers are following that, but it could be big. And so stay in touch in case there's any need for a special emergency meeting by the board prior to our meeting on January 6, 2020 at 10 a.m. for the state of the county. So our next formal board meeting is January 7, 2020. So we'll have a break. And I just wanted to make sure everybody stays in touch with Ms. Jones during this period. So, and as just a reminder, emergency meetings have to be scheduled. We have to give 1 hour notice to the news media for those. Special meetings of the board, we need 24-hour notice. So, so thank you for your cooperation in that. Are there other commissioners that want to make announcements? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 11 years ago tonight, it was very, very cold, 11 years ago tonight. And sometime after midnight, a homeless man curled up at the end of Blair Street, had a bottle beside him, and it was snowing. Next morning, his body was found dead. He was found dead. That was Tom Egan. Died 11 years ago tonight. And tomorrow there'll be a moment of silence in observance at 12:18 p.m. It's 18 minutes past noon tomorrow. So there'll be an announcement that goes out regarding that. But, you know, the important thing that I think about, I knew Tom quite well. Tom and I served in the 2nd of the 162 together, infantry battalion. I got to know him quite well. Very wry, very comical, very down to earth, highly educated, very smart. Had a lot of friends, but none of his friends were with him that night. And so the thing that I think about is, as we see people on the street who are homeless, or we see people who seem to be struggling, is there something that we can do for them that maybe can help them in that moment to potentially avoid the fate of Tom Egan? A little earlier that year, actually it was about a year prior to that, Debbie had seen Tom. We had the, like when we had the Project Homeless Connect, Food for Lane County helped organize the first one. And Debbie told me that night, she said she thought she saw Tom Egan in line. I said, well, it couldn't be Tom Egan. There's no way that Tom is homeless. There's no way that Tom is suffering from any form of disability that causes him to be homeless and to be needing the services that homeless people need. But it was Tom. And I think with a choke, what if we had recognized Tom and said, Tom, what are you doing? Why don't you come and live with us? Or why don't we, what is it that you need? But we didn't. I don't beat myself up for not being there that night. However, the things that we can do, as we see homeless people on the street and we pass judgment on them, if somebody had seen Tom Egan walking down toward the end of Blair that night with a bottle in his hand, yes, he died with a bottle beside him, what would they have done? Would anybody have offered a hand to Tom Egan? It makes us think about that. So Tom was a teacher. He was when I knew him, he was a first lieutenant. He became a major later on in his military career. He always taught people. And today, Tom continues to teach. And tomorrow, we have an opportunity to learn from Tom. And the folks who are volunteers of the Egan Warming Centers named after him have been taught by the memory of Tom. So it's a moment to reflect on, is there something that we can do? Is there something that is within our resources at any one time, or within our resources in general, to help people to avoid the fate that Tom Egan faced 11 years ago tonight?
Okay, other announcements? Okay. Yes, Commissioner, go ahead.
I got a text from Diana just to alert the rest of the board that they're going to have some snacks available to us between meetings, just so you all know.
Oh, it's leftovers from yesterday, I'm sure.
I'm not sure. She just said snacks. She didn't say leftovers.
Okay. Any other announcements? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to item 14B. And C, are there any agenda team requests or work session requests? Commissioner.
So I think we need to go back to our item around the extension and provide some clear direction to staff as to where we're going with that. I believe we sort of, the question was maybe staff needs to circle wagons and get back to us about their ability to, and timing for placing on the ballot and staff workloads and where it fits and other things. I know there was some question about a work session. I'm not quite sure which comes first, a report back from the administrator and Mr. Kyler, or a full-blown work session. But I think we need to provide some kind of clear direction, because it was left unclear and left to come back at this time.
Yep. Okay, I have a proposal, and that is that we set up a board session to go over what needs to be happening in January, what needs to be happening in January, and then obviously we either abandon it or we set up a schedule of what happens, and then we ask the local coordinator for the extension service to be present, and we set up a specific time. Not a public hearing, it's a work session, whether we want to move ahead or not, what the costs are, and pros and cons and who's doing what, if we're going to go for it. That's my idea.
I would agree. We need to do something initially quickly because the timing of this is so quick for a May election, what they're asking for, and we need to either say yay or nay, so that can either move forward or it can be planned differently. So I think there's some urgency to that particular request.
I agree on the urgency. I just was trying to limit the amount of staff work to get to enough information for us to give a yay or nay. And I didn't know if that was a full-blown work session or if that's just a report back from the county administrator and then a kind of go, no-go decision out of the board. So maybe it's just in how long of an item I'm thinking of on the agenda. But yeah, I do think it needs to be done quickly.
Okay, Pat?
I agree, and I think I'm in favor of moving forward as soon as possible. I've made that statement, but I'm looking forward to a discussion on it. Commissioner Sorensen, something that you said toward the end was, particularly interesting to me, and it's something that I had thought, is that people love the extension, and people were happy to say yes to the levy. And it gave us an opportunity to give people something that they wanted to say yes to. And I love hearing yes when people want something. So, and Commissioner Sorensen, you said it, I think, I may be paraphrasing you here, but you said it's an opportunity for us, even before we go, we ask for assistance with the courthouse, to have people say yes to something that we're asking of them.
Yeah, I personally, I feel that if there's energy for it, one way to test that energy is to have the meeting and see who does what, and have staff get ready for that, and they can list off the tasks that need to be done and who's going to do it, extension or us, and who amongst us, legal, legislative, whatever. And then if board decides no, then board will decide no. If board decides yes, it'll be on with the show. So that's my proposal. Commissioner Berney.
Oh, I had nothing to say, but since you called on me, how about an agenda team request is that we put this on as early a meeting in January as possible, and prior to, we have staff do just a little bit of research about who is intending to propose ballot measures or request additional resources when, so we have that framework, but we do make a decision quickly in January.
Off time of the Rose Bowl?
Not that quickly.
So is there support for what Commissioner Berney said? I'm in favor of that.
In favor of
Okay, so that'll be,
what you said.
yeah.
And I think when you say as quickly as possible in January, you're probably talking mid-January between the holidays and getting staff time to prepare and do that. So just as long as you understand, that's probably quick.
A second item would be that Mr. Mokrajski reported to the board during his announcements about the fact that the federal carbon tax and the state aerial herbicide spray ban had been considered by the legislative committee prior to earlier this year, and he, I think, wanted to know, does that report discharge the previous decision 2 weeks ago to send it to the legislative committee for further analysis of the upcoming session of Congress and the upcoming sessions of the legislature? And my answer was that we do want the legislative committee to consider it for that. That's more of a clarification of it, but okay. Any other requests under 14A, B, or C? Okay, seeing none, we are now ready to have our review of assignments.
Do we want to?
Commissioner Sorensen.
I thought that was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said we would bring that up later, so now is later. So thank you for reminding me of that. We did have on our consent calendar this morning an item dealing with the item, what is it? Yeah. An item dealing with the strategic plan, and we specifically set up,
I can do this quick if you want.
yeah, I just wanted to get the number for people following our meeting, and I just, for whatever reason, don't have it.
It's Lane County Strategic Plan Activity Area 2.A.4.
Okay. So let's have Commissioner Burney go over this, because he is the one that proposed this, and he's got it all organized.
It is late. I will do this really quick. Mr. Mokrahajski asked me to read my edited version of Activity Area 2.A.4 from the Lane County 2018-2021 Strategic Plan. This was then looked at after that was mentioned by Mr. Dingle, who made one further edit on what I had proposed, but accepted everything in its entirety, which I've already read into the public record. So if you look at this document, on the top half was the original item we reviewed, and my edits were underlined. And under that, those edits were incorporated, and in red, you will see that Mr. Dingle added to the extent permitted by state and federal law. In other words, we're not going to do anything illegally or inappropriately. And I am absolutely good with that if the rest of the board is, and that's really all we have to say. I know that Mr. Mokrahajski wanted to get this resolved and taken care of before the year was over.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
I agree, and well done, Joe, and I agree with Mr. Dingle's assessment or his addition. But with a caveat, subsequent boards can change this. We're changing the language now. It's not cast in stone, and it'll be looked at again in 2 years and revised or not revised.
Commissioner Buck.
So I just want to clarify that this particular language is going to, the proposal is for this existing language to replace what is currently in our strategic plan under strategic priority 2A4. Is that correct?
That is correct. It largely is what was in our packet, actually. It's just modified. And I would like to also point out there is nothing in this language that will increase any costs as it relates to construction. It all relates to existing prevailing wage requirements, renewable energy required by public buildings by the last legislative session. And it simply articulates what this board has already worked through and agreed to. It just provides more specificity.
I would think that some of the things we do will exceed the limits that you put in here anyway, so.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Bozievich.
I just want to make folks in the public aware, and also the board, that the revised version of this is already posted to our website with the language, including even Mr. Dingle's edit on the end of that. So as the proposed amended strategic plan is all there in a single document now online for anyone to read.
Commissioner Buck.
So I would move approval of what was consent calendar item 6A4, order 19-12-17-04 in the matter of approving the revised 2018-2021 Lane County Strategic Plan that incorporates the edits as proposed.
I would like to second that.
Okay, so the motion is to approve Order 19-12-17-4 with the edits that were suggested by Commissioner Burney, dealing with Activity Area 2.A.4. And
Mr. Dingle's addition.
And Mr. Dingle's addition. Is there a second?
There was a second.
There was a second.
There was a second.
I said I'd like to, I guess I will.
All right, well, now you'd like to, and now you're going to get to. So it's been moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Farr to approve the order. as modified by my recitation of the motion. Further discussion? Commissioner Bozievich?
So I just want to state that there's been some priorities added, some of which I've already stated in another discussion that I may not support as closely as some other commissioners, but I strongly support the idea of leading this county through a strategic plan and having goals. And whether I agree with every goal, it's more important to me to vote in favor of the strategic plan to set up a framework for which we provide leadership to the rest of the county organization. So I'm not going to take a no vote just because there was one strategy I don't quite agree with completely. So I just want to explain to folks that to me, it was more important to get this amended, get some goals set, and get everybody, rowing in the same direction on a set of goals and having the organization focused on those goals.
Okay, any further discussion regarding the order and motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no. And the order as modified by Commissioner Berney and Mr. Dingle is approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Williams, for your work on that, and Commissioner Berney especially. And then that'll be, when they get that ready, I'll sign that amended order. Okay. Are there any other items before we go to review of assignments? Don't see any, so we'll go to item 15, review of assignments.
Chair Sorensen, Commissioners, I think it'll be a surprise to no one that the strategic plan is currently available on the website as amended moments ago. We are very fortunate indeed to have Diana Jones working with us. The items that I have, in addition to that change, we will have a return as quickly as reasonably possible in January to have a work session on the extension service request for a May ballot measure that will clarify obligations and assignments. I saw 5 head nods on that. There is an open request, an open work item for the Legislative Committee to review the legislation as noted by Chair Sorensen. It's also my understanding, I don't have details on this, that Gimple Hill will be returning to the board on February 4th. I believe that's it for assignments. I was also to report that following our standards of thrift and stewardship, there will be food available upstairs for commissioners prior to the start of their evening meeting.
And more so, it is leftovers.
Okay, anything further under review of assignments?
So rummy. I was going to go home and watch the.
Anything further under review of assignments?
No.
Very good. Are there any corrections, additions, or any errors caught by the board members on the review of assignments? I didn't hear any. Thank you. Okay, no executive session, no other business, and so we are now going to have a recess until 5:30. Come back here at 5:30 p.m. for our evening public comment session and also Commissioner remonstrance. And anything further before I recess the board? Seeing none, we will be in recess till 5:30 right here.